Можам нам? Добро. Ги пуштивте луѓето, пошто ги пишуваа дека... Да, ока. Добро утро од името на Институтот за европска политика. Многу ни е драго што имаме толку полна сала на 12 јули, Петровден, Охридско лето, значи многу работи има. Денеска е еден од најтоплите денови во годината, но ние традиционално во ЕПИ во месец јули веќе последните 3 години одржуваме нашата конференција која што е поддржана од оперативниот грант од кој што ни го овозможи делегацијата на ЕУ за нашата долгогодишна работа во поврзување на дискусиите за владењето на правото кои што се во државите членки во ЕУ и Западниот Балкан, меѓутоа со фокус на Северна Македонија. Ова ни е веќе трета година во која што работиме на овие прашања со поддршка на делегацијата, меѓутоа институтот работи во своите веќе 13 години од своето постоење на оваа тема. Зависно од тоа како се одвиваат и приоритетите во ЕУ кај нас, меѓутоа се обидувавме да ја држиме таа врска што е можно почврста и немаше да успееме да немавме толкова поддршка од многу од луѓето кои што се со нас денеска во салата, кои што се со нас од почетокот на постоењето на ЕПИ и ви благодариме. Денешната конференција, традиционално и како во изминатите 3 години, има воведни обраќања од делегацијата на ЕУ и обично се трудиме да го обезбедиме дали Министерството за правда или Секретаријатот за европски прашања. Логиката ни беше дека се ова поранешно, до сега беше Секретаријатот за европски прашања и логиката ни беше дека ова се двете институции без разлика во која позиција се, кои што мора да ги изградат врските за да на стратешко ниво се води прашањето за владење на правото, меѓутоа се обидувавме секогаш да ги обезбедиме и независните тела, како и останатите чинители, пред се тука мислам на судиите и обвинителите, кои што честопати ни присуствуваат на овие дискусии. Како и досега, оваа година имаме делегацијата и Министерството за правда со нас, се обидуваме да рефлектираме на тоа што се променило од изминатата година. Имаме големи новитети, вклучувањето на 4 од државите кандидатки од Западниот Балкан во механизмот за владење на правото на ЕУ е голем пробив за нас. Ние како организација во многу наврати во склоп на Берлинскиот процес, во склоп на нашата комуникација со државите членки на ЕУ и со комисијата, потенциравме дека е потребно што е можно повеќе овие прашања на владењето на правото во државите кандидатки и ЕУ да ги гледаме низ истата призма, бидејќи нам тоа многу ни помага. Ни помага од 2018-та, што сме организацијата која што ги води истражувањата за човековите права од агенцијата за агенцијата за основни човекови права на ЕУ, и се надеваме дека овој инструмент на извештаите за владењето на правото ќе ги искористиме во правилна насока. Ќе бидам искрена, ние се надевавме дека кога ќе биде оваа конференција одржана, извештаите ќе бидат објавени, меѓутоа тоа не е случај. Но сепак решивме дека нема да чекаме. Имаме многу прашањата кои што веројатно ќе бидат предмет во извештаите. Ние сме ги дискутирале многу време и порано, така да мислиме дека има корист од ова, меѓутоа ви најавуваме веројатно дека во септември ќе ве собираме за да ги погледнеме извештаите во својата во она што има што е во нивната суштина. Вториот новитет покрај извештаите е планот за раст, кој што и самата целокупниот инструмент кој што треба да го поддржи реформскиот процес во Западниот Балкан со големо ниво на условеност во владењето на правото. Тоа е логиката всушност на денешната конференција. На првиот панел ќе се обидеме да изрефлектираме на предизвиците во владењето на правото. Најчесто тоа го правиме со колеги од ЕУ, како што е и случај денеска. Меѓутоа, сакаме малку и повеќе да се осврнеме на колку посеопфатно треба да ги гледаме овие прашања и со фокусот на прашањето на основни човекови права. Тут на вториот панел ќе говориме за тоа како можеме најдобро да ги искористиме можностите кои што ги дава планот за раст, реформските агенди, и да погледнеме како на ниво на ЕУ овие прашања преку нивните инструменти за градење на отпорност и финансиска поддршка овозможија или не овозможија вклученост на граѓанското општество, поголема условеност за владењето на правото, и како би можеле всушност сите ние да го дадеме својот придонес во овој несомнено нов инструмент. После овие, во текот на денот, се надеваме дека ќе добиеме многу инпут од вас. Тополе денот, немојте да се заминувате пред да завршиме. Ви ветуваме дека и вториот панел после паузата ќе биде доволно или ако не и повеќе интересен. Толку од мене. Јас ќе се заблагодарам веројатно на колегите кои што е возможија денешната конференција, Ангела, Беба, Стефан кој што не е со нас. Ќе се заблагодарам на говорниците кои што дојдоа, кои што одвоија од своето време да дојдат во средината на јули и да ни посветат дел од своето време и своите гледишта, бидејќи се обидовме да обезбедиме што е можно по широк круг на учесници, за да можеме нашата работа веројатно од септември да ја унапредиме и сите заедно да бидеме во можност подобро да учествуваме во мноштво на овие процеси кои што ни се важни за нас и за нашата иднина. Сега тука би завршила и би му дала збор на заменик амбасадорот на ЕУ во Северна Македонија, Бен Нупнал. Бен, повелете.
Почитувана госпожо Касарска, директорка на Институтот за европската политика, почитувана госпожа Босилковска, представник од Министерство за правда, почитувани гости, дама и господа. Ми представува задоволство да ви се обратам на почетокот од овој форум, кој се фокусира на владењето на правото. Темелна вредност на Европската унија и узлов на напредок на семите кандидатски на нивниот пат кон Европската унија. Why is this so? Because rule of law is a cornerstone for society that focuses on the interest of its citizens. Rule of law is a condition for any free and democratic society respectful of the rights of its citizens. Rule of law is a guarantee for equality and absence of discrimination. This also means that no individual is above the law. Rule of law means that there is independent justice, legal certainty, and predictability. It creates a level playing field and fair competition among economic operators, which is a precondition for investment and prosperity. Finally, rule of law also means accountability and participation, and hence it contributes to good governance and political stability. And this is why rule of law is enshrined as a fundamental principle in the Article 2 of the European Treaty. It is essential for the functioning of the European Union as a rules-based system. And that is why we have developed a number of instruments to uphold the rule of law in the EU and in future member states. These tools include the promotion of rule of law culture, monitoring, and possible sanctions in case of violations. For the candidate countries, rule of law is part of the fundamentals cluster, the starting point and the finishing line of negotiations. And in order to regularly monitor the state of play and enable continuous improvements, the European Union has included North Macedonia and several other candidate countries in its annual rule of law report exercise. This is just another example of integration before accession, as this report so far only covered EU member states. As you all know, the European Commission in its 2023 country report detected significant challenges, but no progress for North Macedonia on rule of law reforms. Today, we are encouraged that the new government plans to make these reforms a priority to ensure independence of justice and non-interference in the judiciary, to address the issue of corruption systematically. And we have ample analysis of what needs to be done and plans on how to do it. Accelerated reforms in these areas will restore citizens' trust in institutions, in a fair society, and equal opportunities. This will improve the quality of life and will convince citizens that their future is actually here. And these reforms will also prepare the country for its future EU membership. Without the necessary reforms, North Macedonia would be a risk in and for the EU, as it would undermine the EU's level playing field. But also, it won't be able to cope with the competitive pressure on the EU single market, and it would fail to attract the necessary investments. You may ask, why now, if the accession process has taken 20 years and has led nowhere so far? And I'd answer, because today there is a new momentum for EU enlargement. The new geopolitical context has shifted the focus of EU leadership to its intrinsic security interests. After the start of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, enlargement is seen as a strategic investment in peace, stability, and security. And EU membership for the Western Balkans is in our mutual political, security, and economic interest. And it is our shared responsibility. To support and advance this process, the European Union has adopted a new growth plan for the Western Balkans. This, and this is important, is not business as usual. It is an unprecedented offer for the Western Balkans to become part of areas of the single market ahead of the actual accession date. Because it is the single market opportunities that drive economic growth and convergence. And the common regional market can be a stepping stone if partners agree to liberalize and align regulations on EU standards. The growth plan also supports the domestic reform agenda in each country on rule of law, public administration, and economic reforms. And it provides fresh funding for investments in infrastructures, digital, energy, transport, and so forth. For North Macedonia, this means additional 750 million euros in grants and highly concessional loans available over a period of 4 years. The payments are strictly linked to the implementation of the reforms agreed by the government with the European Commission. There will be concrete reform targets to unlock the flow of funding. So there is a clear incentive for government to keep direction and momentum of reforms. The effect of the new investment, combined with existing IPA funds and the Western Balkan Investment Facility, is that North Macedonia roughly receives the same support per inhabitant as it would get under the cohesion policy as a future member state. Now it is for Macedonian stakeholders to make the best use of this offering, to adopt the reform agenda to implement key reforms, to agree with Western Balkan partners on increasing economic integration in the regional and in the single market. It's for business to use the new opportunities, for civil society and academia to follow, monitor, and demand accountability, so that citizens can start feeling the benefits already now, while the process is underway and catches momentum towards the accession. Thank you very much. Blagodaram. Hvala lepa.
Thank you, Ben. Сега поканувам Бојана Василкова од Министерството за правда. Ги замоливме колегите од Министерството да ни ги кажат своите планови и веројатно за дел од нас е многу значајно што се нивните очекувања од новите механизми за владење на правото и благодариме Бојана што си со нас денеска.
Ви благодарам. Почитуван заменик амбасадор на делегацијата на Европската Унија, почитувани експерти присутни на денешниот форум. Најнапред ќе ми дозволите да ви се заблагодарам и да ве поздравам од името на министерот за правда Игор Филков, и кој поради однапред утврдена агенда не беше во можност да присуствува на денешниот настан. Би сакала да ја принесам нашата благодарност до Институтот за европска политика за организација на овој форум, како еден од начините на кои што верувам дека ќе произлезат плодни дискусии и заклучоци на оваа исклучително значајна тема. Да не се повторувам за значењето на владењето на правото како една од најважните вредности на демократските општества, а пред се темелна вредност на која што се заснова Европската Унија. Владењето на правото е сршта на процесот на проширувањето на Унијата. Воспоставени и функционални гаранции на судската независност, правични и добро функционални правосудни системи, борба против корупцијата, борба против организираниот криминал, заштита на основните права се клучни за заштитата на вредностите на Европската Унија. Знаете дека во согласност со новата методологија на Европската комисија, како и заклучоците на Европскиот совет од 2022 година, процесот на така наречена постепена интеграција беше воведен, кој што е заснован на заслуги и кој што е реверзибилен. Земјите од проширувањето мора да покажат реален и континуиран напредок во владењето на правото. На домашно тло во однос на Министерството за правда ќе кажам дека реформите во правосудството продолжуваат континуирано согласно новата стратегија за развојна секторска стратегија за правосудството, која што има акциски план кој го опфаќа периодот 2024-2028. За следење на стратегијата во подготовка е методологија и деловник за следење на имплементацијата. Законодавната агенда продолжува со подготовка на Законот за судскиот совет. Знаете дека се работи на измени на Законот за судскиот совет во согласност со оценската мисија на Европската комисија од септември 2023 за работата на судскиот совет. Натаму продолжува работата на работните групи за измени на Законот за јавното обвинителство, Кривичниот законник, Законот за кривична постапка, како и Законот за советот на јавните обвинители. По однос на механизмите за владење на правото, Европската комисија, следејќи ги трендовите, предизвиците на владењето на правото не само кај земјите од проширувањето, туку и на сопствено тло, меѓу земјите членки, досега воведе неколку наменски механизми кои што имаат за цел да направат проверка на владењето на правото. Тоа се така наречени годишни извештаи за владење на правото, веќе ги споменавме и во повеќе наврати постојано ги објаснуваме што тие значат. Оваа година е 5-тиот извештај на Европската комисија и тоа што е ново е дека земјите од проширувањето кои што согласно зборовите на председателката на Европската комисија се воведува за најнапредните земји од проширувањето, односно Република Северна Македонија, Албанија, Црна Гора и Србија. Согласно методологијата на подготовка на овој извештај, официјално во нашата држава започна во месец март. Тоа беше неделата на одржување на подкомитетот за правда и внатрешни работи, во која што се одржаа бројни состаноци со правосудните институции, но исто така и беше дадена наша контрибуција кон извештајот. Дозволете да ви информирам дека согласно таа методологија ние го добивме извештајот на фактографски забелешки и секако наши коментари. Можам да споделам дека извештајот за нас, како и за другите држави од проширувањето, не содржи препораки, меѓутоа од содржината јасни се упатувањата, пораките, јасни се предизвиците на кои што ќе треба многу да работиме и во кои што брз прогрес се очекува од нас. Кон крајот на јули се очекува конечно усвојување на овој извештај и потоа по завршување на парламентарните избори во Европската Унија, се надеваме од септември, ќе продолжи процесот за негово целосно дискутирање пред Европскиот парламент и пред земјите членки. Како што спомна Симонида, да, од септември, значи ќе биде многу важно да се воспостават мониторинг механизми за следење на препораките од овој извештај. Иако нема препораки, меѓутоа на целосно она што е наведено на наодите во извештајот. Го спомнавме исто така планот за раст. Од минатата година, од 2023 пролетта, кога беше најавено дека некаков план за приближување на земјите од проширувањето ќе биде воведен, па се до денес можам да споделам дека се официализираше и се стави во, како да кажам, во еден погон, она што значи план за раст, и можам да кажам дека веќе за администрацијата која што работи на овој документ е веќе јасно што тоа значи. Европската регулатива за инструментот за реформи се усвои во мај 2024 година. Клучниот документ носечки на планот за раст е така наречената реформска агенда. Таа представува сеопфатен и кохерентен пакет на мерки за постигнување на предвидените цели, чија што реализација ќе биде услов, тоест е услов за извршување на плаќањата. Како што спомнавме, во неколку области се утврдени овие приоритети, значи јавната администрација, дигитална, енергетска, зелена транзиција, човечки капитал, деловно обкружување и она за нас што е најбитно е владењето на правото. Во посебен документ се развиени квалитативни и квантитативни мерки и чекори со динамика на нивна реализација, која што треба понатаму да ги разработи предвидените приоритети. Во натамошната постапка, оваа реформска агенда заедно со сите придружни документи треба да биде финализирана и усвоена за конечно заокружување на процесот со еден договор за планот. Во делот на владење на правото, утврдени се неколку приоритети, кои што се во следниве области, односно ги опфаќа следниве области. Тоа е унапредување на правната рамка за изборите, унапредување на независноста и интегритетот на судството, консолидација на судскиот совет, ефикасност на судството, засилување на борбата против корупцијата, борбата против организираниот криминал, како и поврат на имот. Како што кажав, сите овие области понатаму се разработени со квалитативни и квантитативни чекори со одредена динамика на реализација. Можам да споделам дека динамиката е навистина набиена, навистина кратка. Имаме многу работа. Со ова би сакала, значи, да го завршам своето излагање и да исто така го повторам тоа што Симонида го кажа, иако ова е период на летни одмори, температурите се доста високи, меѓутоа и агендата ни е многу интензивна, исто така ни е многу висока. Да споменам и процесите во Европската комисија се доста значајни. Наскоро следува обликување на Европската комисија, ќе бидат многу значајни за нас одредени пораки по однос на назначувањето на председател на Европската комисија, по однос на назначување на комесар за европроширување. Сето тоа се важни пораки од кои што треба да извлечеме одредени заклучоци по однос на проширувањето. Би сакала да кажам и во однос на Европската комисија има исто така постојано процеси на промени во контекст на проширувањето. Тука е и комуникацијата на Европската комисија за реформи на сопствените политики и вредности пред проширувањето, која што беше усвоена во март оваа година. Новата комисија ќе продолжи да работи согласно оваа комуникација и најавени се длабински анализи на земјите од проширувањето, длабински реформи, кои што се разбира повторно ќе продолжат на принципот на постепена интеграција и ќе продолжат врз основа на принципот на заслуги. Меѓутоа, длабинската анализа значи дека секоја земја кандидат и потенцијален кандидат ќе бидат оценети согласно сопствениот напредок во исполнување на критериумите. Исто така, најавени се наредната година промени во начинот на подготовка на извештајот за владење на правото, како и на пакетот за проширувањето. Сето ова значи дека особено е важно да бидеме координирани и заедно да работиме, да соработуваме и да настапуваме координирано во сите овие процеси. Ви благодарам.
Благодарам, Бојана. Ние тука завршуваме и ќе го поканам првиот панел веднаш, бидејќи малку досниме со агендата. За нас беше исклучително важно да чуеме особено за планот за рад, бидејќи сите очекуваме да можеме да се вклучиме на реформската агенда во мониторингот понатаму, меѓутоа тоа ќе биде вториот панел. Благодарам заменик амбасадори уште еднаш и ги замолувам говорниците и Беба да дојдат напред. Ја сменува сега малку на англиски заради... Ме слушате добро? Ме слушате. Сега супер. Ќе сменувам малку на англиски заради тоа што да им е полесно на говорниците, сите имате слушалки, слободно послушате се, има превод и на македонски и на албански јазик. So I have the honor to moderate the first panel at this conference and to welcome our lovely speakers here today. We will be discussing the rule of law as our foundation for EU enlargement. And I'd like to begin with saying that the EU has a number of tools for preservation and of rule of law in all its member states. And while some member states have high standards of rule of law, they also face many challenges. And the EU uses those tools to prevent and to sanction those rule of law challenges. Those tools comprise the EU rule of law toolbox, which, as I said, has preventive and corrective instruments. The basis for the preventive tools includes reporting and dialogue as a means to identify and quickly resolve rule of law challenges, which are structured in the European rule of law mechanism, which we'll be discussing with Ivan here today. The EU Justice Scoreboard, the European Semester, and the Cooperation and Verification Mechanism. On the other hand, the corrective tools are focused on sanctioning rule of law breaches by imposing fines and suspending payments or voting rights in order to end those breaches and restore the rule of law in the member states. These include the infringement procedure, the conditionality mechanism, the rule of law framework, and the Article 7 EU procedure. The effect and the scope of these tools is reviewed by the EU institutions, and they are amended when the necessity arises. The European rule of law mechanism was just recently subject to change this summer, with 4 candidate countries being included in the annual rule of law report, including North Macedonia. And this change prompted us to initiate a discussion on the impact of the rule of law instruments, as well as the inclusion of candidate countries in such exercises and similar initiatives. So I have here 3 speakers live with me today and 1 online. I will ask each and every one of them to
give their opening remarks in 7 minutes, and then we'll move on to questions and answers from the audience. We will begin with Ivan Novosel, coming from the Human Rights House Zagreb. Ivan is the Director of Programs at the Human Rights House Zagreb since 2015, where he coordinates human rights watchdog research, monitoring, advocacy, and educational activities aimed to uphold and promote human rights, with a special focus on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and other very relevant rights. It is our pleasure to welcome you here today again. It's been 2 years since your participation at our policy dialogue, where we discussed rule of law monitoring for EU countries and candidate countries. And you gave detailed analysis on the then relatively new European rule of law mechanism. So enough time has passed for an initial assessment of its effect on the EU member states as part of the preventive mechanisms in the EU rule of law toolbox. So I would begin with just 3 questions in this area. Do you think it contributes to the preservation of the rule of law in the EU member states? And where does it stand in comparison to the other preventive tools in the EU rule of law toolbox? And secondly, since you're coming from Croatia, the latest member state, what is its effect on Croatia? And do you expect it to produce similar results when applied to the current candidate?
Thank you, Beba. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be again in Skopje. It's coming before the start of this panel. That Skopje is always the last event before the summer break. So again, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, it's true that it's been 2 years since we were in Skopje speaking about the rule of law mechanism. At that point, it existed for 2 years. We are now expecting the fourth report, which should be published any day now during the September. And from the outset, what I can say is that the path of creating this rule of law mechanism, the rule of law report, coming from the advocacy from my organization, but also many other EU human rights organizations, has been the long one. And when we see the development, how does it develops these 4 years of its existence, we can say it's a perfect example of how incremental processes, take a slow pace, but hopefully pace that will be kind of carved in stone, so that mechanism will stay here. It's far from perfect, but it's getting better every day. I would say practice makes it better, not perfect at this point. What I can say is that for us, it's been very important to see the introduction of the recommendations in the report 2 years ago, and we've seen that was very much advocated for the first iteration of the report, and we've seen that kind of a movement was very much needed, because shyly, but again, it opened the space for a dialogue. It opened a space for a possibility of civil society and academia, and then again the European Commission, to have a dialogue with the Croatian authorities on the level of the member states. Now, the recommendations, you have looked at them for the member states, for the candidate countries. There are none that you've seen that they're lacking precision. They are too ambiguous. They are too broad. But this is kind of always with those kind of international recommendations coming for the implementation on the national level. But as I said, it is important. It is important for us to have. It is also important for us to have them because it gives, there is one thing that you have to understand, which is important for the context when you talk about how the rule of law is being viewed at the national level and how this mechanism is being used. There is a lot of fatigue in Croatia, but also in the other EU member states when it comes on the level of the civil society on how and a lot of questioning whether these mechanisms are useful at all and how they can be better utilized. So it was important for us who are really supporting of this mechanism, who are using it. It was important for us to see that the Commission heard the feedback from the civil society that included the recommendations. So it's a one step at a time. Your second question attached to the opening one was how the review its preventive role in comparison with the other mechanisms within the rule of law toolbox. I would say that the rule of law report has a potential to become a really sharp tool. But the stones for making the knife sharper has been lost somewhere. So I guess the Commission is trying to find it, and there are several reasons contextual reasons that impact that have a negative impact on why that this tool is not that that sharp as it used to be. First of all, I believe that we are slowly approaching the point where having this exercise on an annual basis should be questioned, because both the Commission, civil society, but also the national authorities cannot do much on an annual basis, especially if you have this exercise in the middle of the super election year, like we had with the national elections, European elections, and now presidential elections. So pretty much all the policy processes are stopped there. We also see that the Commission doesn't have the capacity to follow through with the annual exercise as it should be. When we look the quality of the report, we can say that every year it is getting better, but it's still largely descriptive. It really misses the analytical part. And the best part of the report is, of course, the one dealing with the justice system. Then the second one is on anti-corruption, because it is connected to the justice and to PG home. When you go to the media, things are a little bit more shady, because the Commission doesn't have a clear mandate on it, which hopefully will now change with the passage of the EU freedom of media legislation and the SLAP directives. But then when you get to the check and balances, where, for instance, the Constitution, where the public participation, civil society, the work of the Constitutional Court, these topics are, then you will see that especially in the civil society, Commission is quite lacking in understanding and in describing the problems at the level of the member states. And these are all the arguments basically pointing to the direction that maybe we should have a discussion of not having this exercise every year, but maybe biannually, because it could arguably present better analytical paper, and it could give more time for the implementation. And this is the point that I wanted to talk about and share a little bit today as well. Implementation is where you can get the best quality dialogue and the discussion on the national level. But we have to be realistic on how this discussion is happening. On the case of Croatia, we know that it won't happen on itself. It won't happen because there is a good deal from Croatian authorities.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you here before you start on Croatia?
Yeah.
I know this is going to be a long topic. Can we ask this just a bit later because of the time? We will now move on with our second speaker. I'm very, very pleased to announce our very own Biljana Kovačka. She is a socio-legal feminist researcher whose work is focused on fundamental rights and gender aspects in particular. And for several years, she was a research coordinator in NEPI before moving on to her present role as a gender equality expert at EU Support for the Rule of Law project. She still remains an external collaborator of EPI, a role from which she will speak today. And also she is a senior legal expert in EPI's PANEP team, which works on research for the Agency for Fundamental Rights of the European Union. Diana, I would like to talk to you more about the fundamental rights aspect, the pillar which is missing from the annual Rule of Law reports. So in its motion for a resolution on the European Commission's 2023 Rule of Law report, the European Parliament stressed the necessity to fight against all types of discrimination, hate speech, and crimes specifically targeting minority groups and members of national, ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities, and called on the Commission to include a specific new pillar on this area in its next report, mapping all forms of xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Gypsyism, hate speech, and discrimination across all member states. However, among the proposed novelties for this year's Rule of Law report, there is no mention of the fundamental rights pillar. So I'd like to ask if you could elaborate on the importance of adding this pillar to the report, and how can we connect it to the other pillars already included in it? And secondly, how does the inclusion of Western Balkan candidate countries in exercises such as the reports of the Fundamental Rights Agency affect the preservation and the progress of the rule of law? So 7 minutes and the floor is yours.
Мислам дека првото прашање што треба да го поставиме дали воопшто ни треба да по самиот извештај. Самиот фокус на извештајот веќе беше претенциран од многу актери и од нативно треба да момент, меѓутоа и надвор да врачи на граѓанското сектор секако меѓутоа, ако се вратиме назад да слушаме слушањето, ще еден пак по рамки извештајот, можеме да тргнеме на пример слушање. Океј? Да, еве, добре, така. Аха, окей.
Да, окей, супер. Значи првата работа е да видиме дали воопшто ни треба ваков столб кој што ќе се однесува на темелните права, или да бидам поконкретна, парламентот го побара како столб кој што ќе биде во врска со недискриминација, еднаквост, говор на омраза, расизам, нетолеранција, значи во принцип во врска со член 2, дел од другите вредности кои што се споменати во членот 2 од договорот за Европска унија. Дел од аргументите зошто не ваков столб би било, на пример, и за тие од нас што работиме на човекови права, би било дека со квалитетот на извештаите ваков каков што е, а Иван веќе спомена, квалитетот е доста критикуван, особено на страна на граѓанскиот сектор, дали ние сакаме да имаме ваков столб во извештајот, заради тоа што со постојниот јазик како што се користи, кој што е доста мек, може да биде непрецизен, на моменти празен, дипломатски, тоа нас ни е многу познато од нашите извештаи за напредокот, може да дојдеме до ситуација каде што може да зборуваме за нормализација на очигледни закани или пак на прекршување на човековите права во самите извештаи. Значи, да се намали значењето, да се намали влијанието, да се намали важноста на тоа што се случува преку користењето на таков јазик. Пак ќе кажам, нас ова тука дома ни е многу добро познато како изгледа. Дополнителна причина е, мислам дека Иван и ова го начна, е теретот кој што државите веќе го носат во врска со известувањето.
Не е само овој извештај, туку се многу други извештаи. Има извештаи исто така и во врска со човековите права и не е само Европската унија, има и многу други форуми. Во врска со оваа критика, мислам се поставува прашањето кога веќе комисијата се заснова толку многу при правењето на извештајот за владење на правото на постојни извори, како што се и праксата на судот, и во Страсбур, и судот на правдата, на ОПСТЕ, на Обединети нации, на други тела, тогаш всушност прашањето е колку многу дополнителна работа, дали воопшто ова ќе предизвика многу дополнителна работа за комисијата, и секако некои велат дека дури ова е веќе покриено преку други извештаи, не треба да се покрива преку извештајот за владење на правото. Можеме до негде да се согласиме, меѓутоа ако сме искрени, не е така за сите прашања. Едно од прашањата кои што можеби од наша гледна точка е најинтересно, заштитата на малцинствата дефинитивно не е нешто што е добро обработено, покриено во други извештаи. Сепак, мислам дека бидејќи зборуваме за извештајот за владење на право, изборуваме за Европската комисија, која што нели е чувар на договорите, мора да се завртиме на кај тоа што ни е всушност целта и од каде потекнува и овој извештај и целата вежба околу владењето на правото, што значи дека мора да се вратиме до членот 2. А во членот 2 знаеме дека има многу повеќе вредности, отколку само тие кои што сега во моментот ги разгледува извештајот. И како резултат на тоа што има повеќе вредности, начинот на кој што е концепиран, односно фокусиран извештајот во моментот, всушност предизвикува распарчување на вредностите, разгледување на едните, оставање и водење напред за сметка на други вредности кои што се дел од овој член. Тоа може да предизвика, односно може веќе и да предизвикува проблем по однос на впечатокот што го остава комисијата, по однос на тоа кои вредности ги смета за повеќе важни, наспроти тоа кои ги смета за помалку важни. Исклучувањето исто така на овие вредности значи дека не даваме доволно значење на нивната взаемна поврзаност и испреплетеност, заедно со особено аспектите на владење на право, како што се, например, судството, кое што и како представува прашање за човекови права и каде што како е важен принципот на еднаквост и недискриминација, особено недискриминација во процесите, меѓутоа и недискриминација во многу други аспекти кои што се важни за судството, како например изборот на судиите на нашето подрачје, особено во бивша Југославија, знаеме дека имаме доста инциденции на политичка дискриминација, така што ова прашање и како задира и во други аспекти од овој извештај. Други прашања кои што исто така би биле се дека ако се продолжи со ваквиот пристап, дел од критиката што некои ја даваат на ваквото распарчување е дека ако не се внесат вредностите, човековите права и вредноста еднаквост и недискриминација во извештајот, продолжуваме со двојниот пристап на Европската унија, каде што дел од вредностите ги третира различно дома, за сметка на тоа како ги третира надвор. Ова значи дека во рамки на земјите кандидатки, во земјите на проширувањето ќе биде ставено големо значење, например, на заштита на малцинствата, додека пак такво значење и таков преглед нема да биде даден по однос на дома, и тоа е уште една причина зошто е добро да се прошири извештајот, за да се земат предвид и да се додаде односно ваков столб, или да се земат предвид и прашањата на недискриминација, еднаквост, па дури и пошироко темелни права. Тие, како што кажав, се неразделно поврзани со дел од предизвиците за владењето на правото, меѓутоа исто така, ако целта на владењето на правото помеѓу другото е спречување на арбитрерно владење како такво, особено над малцинствата, тогаш е клучно да се каже дека ни е потребен таков столб, односно столб кој што ќе води сметка за еднаквост и недискриминацијата. И многу други причини кои што може да ги дискутираме понатаму во панелот, заради кои што мислам дека е клучно да разговараме за тоа дека сепак е добро да се размислува во насока на тоа што го предложи Европскиот парламент, односно додавање на оваа тема во извештаите за владење на право. Во однос на второто прашање беба како да го врзиме со другите столбови, мислам клучното е како сакаме воопшто да го воведеме, дали сакаме да биде независен столб покрај 4 постојачки, дали сакаме да го вклучиме во catch-all столбот, кој што има различни прашања, дали сакаме да го меинстримираме прашањето низ други столбови, например да биде разгледувано низ постојните столбови како еднаквост и недискриминација, нетолеранција и така натаму, дали сакаме комбинација од двата пристапи и хоризонтално и како посебен столб, или имаше дури предлози дали само да направиме резиме на што е тоа што го прави Унијата дома, значи не надвор, дома во врска со овие прашања. Значи имаме многу опции, може да ги разговараме истите. Во интерес на времето да се задржам малце на третото прашање, последното прашање бева сега за почеток, што за нас значи вклучувањето во активностите на Агенцијата за темелни права.
на Европската Унија по однос на зачувувањето и напредокот на владењето на правото. Зачувувањето на владењето на правото, односно на докаде сме стигнати, очигледно дека ни стана еден од најголемите предизвици со кои што се соочуваме, и пак ќе кажам, ние тоа многу добро го знаеме од нашиот контекст и мислам дека ќе станува дури уште повеќе важно заради тоа што веќе сега се отвараат и во рамки на Унијата многу повеќе разговорите по однос на тоа што значи уназадување, како бекслайдинг, што значи и ерозијата на вредностите и на самото владење на правото и така натаму. И од тука има неколку причини зашто сметам дека важно е нашето вклучување во активностите на агенцијата. Првото е дека за разлика од некои од другите извештаи, вклучително и годишниот прогрес извештај за земјата, извештаите на агенцијата прават многу отворена, јасна, прецизна и длабинска анализа на прашањето на кои што се однесуваат. Значи, таму нема многу шетање и политички говор, туку има многу конкретни идентификувања на точки каде што нашата правна рамка институционална треба да се подобрат или каде што имаме некакво уназадување. Секако агенцијата не дава никакви препораки, така она практично диагностицира ние докаде сме стигнати, не дава препораки, меѓутоа како што кажа Иван, исто како и за извештајот, со самиот факт што ги имаме на одите, ние можеме да продолжиме кон се извинувам, Бојана кажа во воведните зборови, можеме да преминеме кон работење на унапредување на прашањата кои што се покренати. Можеби за мене најважната придобивка од вклучувањето во овие активности на ФРА е шансата за социјализација пред пристапување. Односно, нашата шанса како земја членка да учествуваме барабар заедно со другите земји членки на Европската Унија, поточно со земјите членки на Европската Унија, во процесите, вклучително и во активности на агенција која што пак ќе кажам толку темелно и детално ги разгледува човековите права и особено преку примена на сериозно високи истражувачки стандарди, што исто така мислам дека е добра лекција, односно добро учење за нашите институции. Значи, несомнено, одлична можност за учење и можеби само последната точка која што би ја споменала е дека барем од она што ние имаме успеано, беба спомена дека јас сум и дел од тимот на ЕПИ кој што работи на истражувањата за агенцијата за темелни права, она што ние сме го забележале преку темите кои што се покренуваат со овие извештаи е дека агенцијата успева да детектира многу рано прашања кои што може да предизвикаат проблем во иднина и кои што може да прераснат во сериозно поголем проблем, не само што успева да ги детектира, туку исто така дека со тоа успева да ги наметне на европската агенда и дотолку повеќе интересно да ги истурка границите за третирање на овие прашања подалеку и подалеку од тоа до каде што сме стигнати да одговорат на денешните предизвици. И на крајот, после некое време, комисијата, парламентот и другите успеваат да ја стигнат агенцијата по однос на темите кои што ги наметнува и за нас е супер да сме дел од развоите додека се случуваат. Јас мислам дека тоа е можеби заедно со социјализацијата она што е најдобро што може да ни се случи. Значи тој раст и развој на нашата земја преку активностите внатре во агенцијата, рака под рака заедно со другите земји членки во Европската Унија, каде што нема да мора да каскаме или да чекаме некое време нешто да се постави како услов за нас за да напредуваме по однос на конкретно прашање. Толку сега за сега, ви благодарам.
Дали се слушам? Многу се слушам. Добро. Ме слушате сега? Така? Супер. Одлично. Ти благодарам, Билјана. We love a speaker who sticks to the 7 minutes limit. So for our third speaker at this panel, we are very excited to have here today a representative of another candidate country, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome, Edo Kanlic. He is coming from the Transparency International in Bosnia. He is an advocacy and public policy manager there. As a civil society professional and human rights activist, he is invested in civic engagement, combating corruption, conflict resolution, and monitoring the European integration of Bosnia. So Edo, I'd like to talk to you about some latest developments affecting Bosnia. In March 2024, the European Council decided to open accession negotiations with your country. The decision came after Bosnian authorities met the relevant requirements set forth by the European Commission. However, further capacity building is necessary for this process to progress. So, in your opinion, what are the needs of CSOs in Bosnia in view of starting the accession negotiations and further steps in the process, such as the preparation of the rule of law roadmap?
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me right there in the, yeah, is it okay? Okay. Thank you for having me and thank you for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to be in Skopje. And it's really good to have Bosnia back at the table when we speak about European integration, because we were out for so long time as we really missed a lot of opportunities because of some domestic dynamics in our politics, but also because of maybe some wrong approaches by the European Union towards Bosnia and Herzegovina in the previous decades. Before I start talking about the needs of the civil society, I have to remind us all that we are commemorating the 29th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide this week. And the best way to portray the state of the rule of law in the country is that family, instead of mourning their loved ones, they have to fight denial and glorification of war criminals. Which also speaks a lot about the state of judiciary in Bosnia and Herzegovina, since glorification of war criminals is prohibited by the criminal code of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So to set the scene in which civil society in Bosnia and Herzegovina works, I have to say that we had a paradox that since we got the candidate status in 2022 and the green light now in last March, we've seen deterioration in human rights in Bosnia and Herzegovina with a lot of initiatives which can be really seen as a step back when we speak about human rights and liberties. I'm talking here about recriminalization of defamation in Republika Srpska, the attempts to adopt the so-called foreign agents law in that entity, and a lot of initiatives, not only Republika Srpska, but also in federation, so in all parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are going against recommendations and conditions set by the European Commission. Also, when speaking about participation in decision-making process, we've seen in the last years that it's getting more difficult for us to really meaningfully participate in decision-making processes. Processes are non-transparent, even those led and facilitated by the EU. We have example of negotiations in the new electoral code, which was facilitated by the EU and the US, which was actually happening behind the closed doors, without any way for civil society to send their proposals and to really take part in this. Also, access to information is really a problematic area, since it's not just that we cannot sit and talk about our proposals, but we face difficulties to get draft laws drafted by the Council of Ministers, and it's one of the areas where we have to focus a lot in the next period. Also, what we've seen, and not only in Bosnia, but in other countries, is misuse of urgent procedures. So we really skip all those consultation parts because we have urgency to adopt something that was waiting for years to be adopted. And what we've seen is also the package voting. So a lot of important reform laws are being voted for at the same session. So there is no time to analyze them and to really send comments and try to influence decision makers on how to really take into consideration all the recommendations from the European Commission. So yeah, that is the scene that we have right now. Civil society was kind of out of these EU stories for years because nothing was really happening there. We've lost a lot of years since the Stabilization Association Agreement that was signed in 2008 and just put into force in 2015, because we were waiting for some verdicts of European Court of Human Rights to be implemented, which are still not. I'm speaking about constitutional changes regarding the Sejdić-Finci case and all similar cases of that one. And actually, Commission decided that they waited too long and nothing happened, so they moved on, and that was a bad message for decision makers. When you decrease demands over time, as it happened with the opinion of the European Commission on the Bosnian application for the membership, where we had 40 key priorities, then increased to 8, and then at the end to 3. It's a bad message for all of us, and it encourages the restrictive forces to really go with their plans. So we are part of the initiative for monitoring of the European integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a non-formal coalition of NGOs, which is now trying to find the best way how to take a meaningful role in negotiations once it starts. We are looking to the regional examples such as Konvent in Serbia and Montenegrin case, which is not maybe the best one for Bosnia, since it would be very difficult to decide who would be in the working groups. But we are trying to check our capacities, which are unfortunately insufficient. Partly due to donors policy who focused for years on specific issues and mostly to those from the chapter 23, but even insufficient even there. So we have to think on how to cover all the other areas that are important for negotiations, but we are trying to use all available mechanisms and projects in Bosnia funded by the EU, such as the EU for Civil Society, with whom we actually started discussing on which sort of trainings would be necessary for civil society to really take part in negotiations. When we speak with institutions on how to involve civil society in negotiations, we have two opposite approaches. While we want to talk about the channels of communication and the ways on how to send our proposals and take part in negotiations, institutions are mostly focused on picking on who will be there from civil society. Again, talking about the ethnic criteria and geographical representation, which is always a bad approach in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Since I mean, we cannot talk about ethnic quotas in civil society. That would be a bad approach. And if that approach is welcomed by the EU, that's a very bad message for all of us who are working in these issues. So it's not about who will be part of the process. It's about the tools and mechanisms that we'll have at our disposal on really how to be there and how our messages would be taken into consideration, which is not the case with mechanisms that we have so far. So yeah, another precondition that is really very crucial for us is improvement of communication strategy of the EU institutions. And I'm not only talking about the EU delegation in Sarajevo, but also about Commission and all the people who are working on our countries in Brussels. Since what we've got are vague messages and recommendations, also, as I mentioned, decrease in demands. We need really improvements in communication, since we as civil society representatives see EU institutions and partners in this fight, as we call it. But unfortunately, occasionally EU representatives act as local political actors, which results in bad quality laws that are being adopted and portrayed as reform laws. I'll stop here, and then we can talk in more details in the next round.
That's perfect timing. Thank you so much. The last, but certainly not the least speaker at this panel today is a representative from the European Economic and Social Committee, Ionut Sibian. Ionut is joining us online. You can see him. He is the Executive Director of the Civil Society Development Foundation, a member of the Board of Directors of the Orange Foundation, and the Vice President of the Western Balkans Follow-up Committee. He is a civil leader, expert in the field of associations and foundations, enabling environment for the third sector, enlargement policy, and the Western Balkans. So, Ionut, as a representative of the committee, I'd like to talk to you about its initiative from February 2024 to welcome civil society representatives from EU candidate countries. A total of 131 enlargement candidate members were selected to make up the pool of civil society experts who will be participating in the committee's work, thus making the EESC the first institution to open its doors to EU candidate countries. So my first question would be, can you please elaborate some more on this initiative? And what are its aims, and what are the intended effects of the memberships of the included countries on their respective accession process?
I hope you hear me. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Yeah, so we are in a pilot phase that will go through this year. It's a honorary title for the picked members who will join us to work with us in Brussels. We received a tremendous number of applications. It was very difficult to pick from those applications. The idea is that the selected members, they started already in May to work on a number of opinions and legislative requests from the European Commission related with enlargement. This participation means that they are part of the drafting working groups, the debate in the sections, and then the adoption in the plenary. in the plenary of September, the focus, the topic of it will be enlargement. This is for the moment the pilot year. In December, we'll have a evaluation of how it worked for the first year and improve it. And I hope this will be one of the flagship initiative of European Economic and Social Committee for the next year. And I hope other institutions in Brussels will follow our model. But beside that, for instance, I'm now drafting an opinion requested by the Hungarian presidency on the way forward for enlargement, and I involved one of the ECMs as expert in drafting together with me and the rapporteur the opinion. It's Simonida is there with you, so we go a bit beyond the mandate that we drafted in the beginning for ECMs. And the whole idea of this initiative is to bring you to Brussels. For instance, yesterday and before yesterday, we had a plenary. We invited many of the ECMs in the plenary. We had a debate between your representative with Roberta Metsola, the head of European Parliament, and the vice presidents of the all new groups, democratic groups from European Parliament, plus the members of the parliament that will take over the tasks for the countries in the Western Balkans, monitoring and committees between the European Parliament and the candidate countries. So this is in a nutshell the proposal. It was very difficult to find the legal base to do it, but I'm very happy that we succeed to do it. And what is on the table for our colleagues that will join us? I think just the fact that they are able to speak and debate with members of European Parliament, European Commission. This is an important asset, because usually when they are coming for this fact-finding mission in your countries, you have 1 hour, 20 NGOs in the European Commission delegation to make your case. So this is 2 days every month where you have those people in our debates. Then it's also the way that we draft our opinions. Always we have public hearings. The Commission is there. The rapporteur from the Parliament is there. So again, you have the opportunity to advocate for your calls. And the third level is organized civil society in Brussels. What I encourage you always when I'm discussing with you is to become associate members of the European platforms. Already the Balkan Civil Society Development Network, it's a member of the European Civic Forum. We are discussing with Civil Society Europe, to make some guidelines for their members, the big platforms, in order to attract members from the region. So I think all in all, we are trying to create a friendly ecosystem for you in Brussels, of course, to interact, to learn, and to speak. That's the whole idea. And I think this will be the results. We'll see it, in 1 year in the reports, in the attitude of the Parliament and the European Commission and the organized civil society in Brussels. So all in all, I'm quite optimistic that the results of the evaluation in December, it will be very positive. And I will finish with that. Already the Parliament, the Council and the European Commission, they were really thrilled to have this initiative, and the Commission was willing to fund it because we didn't have the financial allocation to support all this effort in the EEAC. So the Commission immediately put forward for 1 year the budget. That's a good sign from my side.
Thank you, Jonut, and thank you all for providing much food for thought for our audience. And in that spirit, I'd like to open the floor to questions from our participants. Anyone? Any questions? Do we have any questions online? No? Okay, then I have so many questions for all of you. I'd like to go with the same line as we went from to begin with, Ivan. Can we now elaborate on Croatia and the effect of the European rule of law mechanism on the country?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for reaching out the 7 minutes. It didn't look like that at the beginning. You know, your second question was how do I see the differences between the rule of law mechanism being applied in the candidate countries and in the member states? I think you're much better off. You're in much better position because there is a conditionality going on, and what I heard from the colleague from the ministry, from your Ministry of Justice, there was a dialogue, there was a discussion, there was a happening going on when the government was preparing its contribution for the rule of law mechanism. That is not the case in Croatia. We see that the government prepares that. Is also it is also bad as all the other reports sent to the international institutions is descriptive. It really lacks in any analysis as well. So you're much better off because the institutions are putting much more. EU institutions are putting much more eye on what is happening in the candidate countries, and your national institutions are much more attento, you know, to implement the EU acquis, because you're in that process. But in Croatia, I mean, ever since 2011, when the accession agreement was signed, and when we entered the EU in 2013, well, I mean, you know, there is no conditionality is gone, so things went down the road. This is the case with the rule of law mechanism. And just to describe you how that looks like. For the first 2 years of the report, there was no discussion happening at the national level whatsoever. Apparently, there was some discussion happening at the parliamentary committee on the EU affairs, but none of the members of the civil society was present there. No one from the academic community. So there was basically no discussion. It was a presentation of the report and whatnot was said at the parliament. For the first 2 years, we as a Human Rights House organized several discussions, but of course that was no. It was not on the political level as it should be, as you have it equally if you compare it with what is happening with the European semester, which is also one of the preventive tools. You see there is much more political traction on it. Why? Because it has financial ramifications. The rule of law mechanism, unfortunately, doesn't have it. But to get on the level of the implementation, 2 years ago, a year ago, we had so-called how the Commission framed that, a key dialogue. They framed it a key dialogue. So it was a collaboration between the Commission and the EU FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency, where they organized in Zagreb a key dialogue on the judiciary pillar of the rule of law report. And that was the only time I can remember since 2011 that in the same room you had the Supreme Court president, the high political officials from the Ministry of Justice, the presidents of the judicial and the prosecutorial associations, the law professors from all the big law schools in Croatia, and advocates from the biggest human rights and the rule of law organizations in the country. That's it. So you have to have an external agent that brings basically all the interlocutors that should have a conversation on a daily basis at home at the same room. And this is basically the main, at the same time, the opportunity for the rule of law mechanism to be more effective at the national level, but also the danger because the Commission doesn't have the energy, doesn't have the capacity to do that with all the other with all the other pillars. And this is where we hope we will see much more investment by the new commission in collaboration with FRA to be more present at the national level. We also see that the representation of the commission, the former delegation of the union in Zagreb, is really not having that strength as we were used to, being the Brussels muscle in Zagreb to basically kind of charge some of the things. But I mean, nevertheless, we stay firmly behind this rule of law mechanism and behind the recommendations, because it is an important venture of the EU becoming more present around the topics of the previous chapter 23 that you are right now in, that we kind of lost. And if you would just allow me, because you were mentioning the fundamental rights chapter being added to the rule of law, there is a lot of conversation around that ever since the beginning, before even that the mechanism was out there. Some 2 years ago, we had a panel organized by us in Zagreb, where we wanted to have a discussion about what is the intersection between the fundamental rights and the rule of law, because it has to be. If you don't have that, then you have the rule of law that is empty of the essence, empty of the values. I must say that before that discussion, I was all supporting that, all the topics that are important for human rights, for fundamental rights, racial discrimination, LGBT, I mean, everything that we work on should be part of that. After that talk, I changed my opinion slightly. Why? Because if you put everything that is out there connected to human rights into something that was designed and has the potential to create an environment where we should be more effective on the national level to protect fundamental rights, is not going to do us any benefits. I think that the rule of law report should tackle horizontal issues that are important, like right to participation, what you mentioned. We should have, the EU should stand before telling all the candidate countries to adopt laws on right to participation. So to have legal acts where the ways of how the civil society representatives are appointed to the working groups for the laws and public policies are appointed. How does the consultation process looks like? All of these processes that right now are in this shady pillar of good governance, very vague, that no one knows. We know how this should be framed. It should be framed as a right, and all human rights, if they are effective, they have to be prescribed by the law. So we need the legislation, and this is, I mean, if you want the most important single lesson from Croatia that was not implemented while we could done that up until 2013, that was that we missed the opportunity to protect our right to public participation as a legal right. That's why right now we are living in the ruins of all the nice structures for public participation, as a lot of government council, this partnership, that partnership, in consultations, and all the things that are created that are not functioning right now, and that are actually having a detrimental effect to citizens being involved in decision-making processes, because they're in vain. They're not genuine. They are, smoking list, fig leaf, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. So you mentioned the conditionality mechanisms for the member states. I'd like to announce that we'll be discussing the conditionality mechanisms for the Western Balkans in the second panel. So please stay tuned and don't leave after the break. Biljana, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that there are several approaches of adding the fundamental rights pillar or the pillar of non-discrimination in the annual rule of law report. Which one is the best in your opinion?
Окей, да, окей. Деба, извини, ќе зборам навам заради технички причини. Според мене, како што споменав во излагањето, мојата позиција е повеќе во насока на Иван што го кажа, иако доаѓам од човекови права, исто тоа нормално дека сакам човековите права да бидат во центарот на се. Екстензивно вклучување на fundamental rights како такво, не мислам дека треба да биде приоритет на овој извештај, меѓутоа затоа споменав дека во рамки на тоа што парламентот го спомена во резолуцијата, како разгледување, иако парламентот фаворизира столб посебен за еднаквост и недискриминација, мислам дека треба да се размислува во опцијата, треба да се размислува исто така за опцијата за хоризонтално вклучување на прашањето. Или хоризонтално вклучување на прашањата низ извештајот, или пак вклучување повторно ќе кажам, може би ети во насока како столб, меѓутоа концентрирано вклучување на прашањата кои што се во врска со еднаквост и недискриминацијата и споменати во резолуцијата, без да се шири многу извештајот во сите различни насоки, заради тоа што тогаш веќе ќе премине во нешто што не е, а како што рековме, уморот од известување на државите е вистинска работа. Мислам, вистински постои. But the part which I found most interesting from both my other panelists' interventions was exactly this focus on participation. So my particular take on participation is that, of course, it's a human right, but that it could also be perceived as a principle, a crucial fundamental principle as such. And as such, it could be also mainstream throughout all of the activities which you undertake in relation to the rule of law. I take Ivan's notes very seriously, especially because I remember when I was doing my doctoral research in Croatia a few years ago, everyone was basically saying, do what you can before accession. Like, that's where the traction is, that's where you can do something, like later on you're losing the momentum, the government just won't listen. So do as much as you can. Before that. I found a lot of similarities between what Ada was saying in relation to the participation challenges. I would say maybe too many, more than I would have liked, in relation to various aspects, the urgent procedures, packages voting, who is to take part in which processes, and the fact that we also in this country still don't have clear criteria on who participates in public discussions, and it's often the usual suspects. It's not regularly an open call, let's say, for expression of interest for participation, and all of this creates serious limits on what we view or how we view participation, and basically boils it down to a practice of the current government or forces in power, which in the end can result in complete watering down, as Ivan mentioned. So we have already the warning story from Croatia. And another thing is also the participation of other actors in these processes. I think that Edo was very much right to mention that sometimes representatives from international organizations or external actors get involved in processes as if they are local actors. And sometimes they are even ascribed more importance in these processes than local actors are, which has an undoubtedly huge impact on the position where civil society is, and basically it disempowers and takes the agency, part of the agency, but also the position of civil society to be able to forcefully push for issues and for agendas, which it from the ground finds that it's important for its local level. Of course, part of this is like probably the years-old discussion on how funding drives capacities and how it drives agendas. But I won't get into that because, yeah, I'm already straying a lot from what they've, sorry? Absolutely, yeah. But definitely I would echo the worry in relation to participation in these mechanisms, which is why I'm particularly happy because of this pilot phase that we are having with the council that the other panelists spoke about, and I really look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you, Biljana. You just gave an introduction for my next question for Edo on the participation in these types of rule of law instruments and initiatives. So Edo, in view of what Ivan and Biljana stated, and especially in view of do what you can before accession, what do you think? How can we move things forward for Bosnia, considering that it is not included in exercises such as the rule of law report?
Yeah, thank you. Well, there's a lot to do actually before we get and then become a part of all of these mechanisms. I mean, let's just check what are the available mechanisms. Why do we have these country reports, which are not even called progressive reports anymore, because there was almost no progress, at least in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I would say it also in other countries as well. So how do we use these reports and how they're framed? I mean, let's just talk about the participative processes for the country reports. We have consultations for CSOs in April every year. Reports are published in October, November, depending on year. And you have a lot of laws that are adopted in the meantime during the late summer when no one is following what's going on, and there are no assessments from civil society regarding these laws in the country reports. Even when they're well articulated and defined, and in case of Bosnia, most of the last reports were actually rather negative ones, we do not have a good communication from the institutions afterwards, especially from the high-ranking officials. So you have a civil society who's talking about the report findings and about all the challenges in reform processes. And then you have, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, who comes to Sarajevo and talks about tremendous progress that has been achieved. So that's really a bad message for citizens who get confused on who's right in all of this. So it's really contributes to jeopardizing the credibility of the EU in the country. Of course, it will be very much important to see who will be the next commissioner for enlargement, as it also influences the credibility of the process and the perception of our societies. So it should be someone, some credible person from the country which has a good rule of law record, preferably not from the neighboring states, the Western Balkans. As I mean, Macedonia is not a place to talk about misuse of bilateral disputes. So as far from the Balkans, the better. Really, who will be next commissioner? Who will be the rapporteurs from European Parliament for our countries and the presidents of delegations for relations of European Parliament and our parliaments? In previous mandate, unfortunately, we did not have very active individuals as rapporteurs. Which we often seen as our allies in the parliament and as a microphone of civil society in the parliament who would really address the main obstacles. I mean, we'll talk about the growth plan at the next panel, but speaking about consultations with civil society, it was one of the main flaws and I would say challenges for civil society because no one was consulted before it was created. Even now, there are a lot of questions on how it's going to be implemented, and the EU did not play well on this. I know that they had very strict deadlines because they wanted to finish as much as possible with the previous parliament and the previous structures in Brussels, but still it has to be opened up for civil society in all the Western Balkan 6. Yeah, we talked about FRA as well. We are not part of it, and we discussed it with people from Vienna. The problem is that the state has to apply to be a part of these mechanisms, and in Bosnia there was no interest in doing so. Now we, as a coalition of CSOs, so trying to find the partners in institutions. We have the Ministry for Human Rights, we have Ombudsperson's institution, which might be the best addresses to maybe advocate to apply for inclusion of Bosnia in all of these mechanisms. But as I said, we have to work on the existing ones. Speaking about the process of negotiations, we still do not have our national program for adoption of the acquis. The only country in the region which is a candidate that does not have one. Macedonia adopted its first program almost 20 years ago, and Bosnia is still struggling to get it. And why is it important for us? It should guide as some roadmap for all of us with the strict demands, but also deadlines and responsible institutions, because so far how we can actually monitor the process is ad hoc approach and daily politics. And if there is a structured approach on how to really follow the process, it's just too abstract to make it closer to citizens, and that is the biggest obstacle because we have decrease in support for the integration process, especially in Republika Srpska. So we have to explain to the citizens why is it important to do all of these reforms, and that it's not just some demands from Brussels, but our needs and the needs of the citizens of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you. My final question is for Jonut. So in his previous contribution, Edo spoke about the need for improvement of the communication between candidate countries and EU institutions. So can you elaborate on how the inclusion of candidate countries in the initiative of the ESC improve their communication with the EU institutions? And what can it do in terms of advocating on their behalf before the EU institutions?
Thank you. But before I want to comment a bit on some statements of my previous speakers. Ivan, you said that we should push now civil society for reforms in the period of pre-accession, because after accessions, things will not move forward, will be in the position to defend what we achieved during the negotiation process. But if you take Romania and Bulgaria, we have the mechanism for cooperation and verification. In terms of Bulgaria, I think it didn't work, but in terms of my country, Romania, it worked a lot. Basically, the reports of this mechanism that were published in December every year, large part of the information, it was from civil society and from the consultation that the Commission had with civil society. So I think for the countries in the Western Balkans, when they will join, I think such a mechanism, it's probably it will be difficult to escape, as it was the case of Croatia, where till the last minute it was the discussion to have it or not. But from my point of view, in Romania, it was a very, very beneficial mechanism. Of course, we could discuss at a later stage. You know, some country use it for areas that were not meant to be an assessment instrument, like the accession into Schengen area. And now about you were complaining about the growth plan, the fact that you wake up in the morning and you found out that is this proposal on the table. Recovery and Resilience Facility, it was the same for us. I mean, you know, it was the proposal there, and then in our case, it's the national government that pushed for consultation with civil society, because the Commission didn't want it, frankly speaking. So if you look into my report in the next panel, you will discuss about the growth plan. I was the rapporteur for the opinion on the growth plan. You will see that we put very important recommendation for the European Commission. First of all is the setting up the monitoring committees for the growth plan. These monitoring committees should include the representative of civil society at large, meaning the three groups: NGOs, trade unions, employers association, and to have a balance when we talk about the voting system in the committee. We have the example in Romania and in Poland where this was achieved, and the government cannot do changes in the plan without passing it through the vote of the monitoring committee, where, as I said, we have a good bunch of votes inside. Now, staying with the growth plan and maybe giving you some food for thought for the next meeting, it was also this scoreboard that we put it there, linked with the reforms and the conditionalities in our report, and some of them they were taken forward in the negotiations of the Troika for the final version of the document. But what I would stress is that you should find ways, you know, to have also allocations in these plans, also for civil society. And this is important. We achieved that in Romania with Recovery and Resilience Plan. The Italians, they have it in their plan, so it's not something unusual. Now, coming back to the question that was posed for me, I think you know, one of the most important things is the legitimacy process that ECMs provide for you. We had the case, for instance, in Serbia, where the head of Joint Consultative Committee, that it's our body of working in ESC with the countries that they started negotiations. So in Serbia, it was arrested after the demonstration, and because our pressure in Brussels, and it happened many times in Serbia, it was released in 24 hours. So we offered this, in a way, as much as we could, for civic activists, let's say, trying to defend you in difficult times in your countries. And as I mentioned before, the fact that you will be twice a week, twice a month in Brussels, working with us in all this process, will help you also in getting some, let's say, tips and tricks how to put the discussion forward with the Parliament, with the European Commission, and how to, be more, let's say, visible in this debate with your government, because sometimes they offer you the information, but the European Commission, they want that, when they don't want to do things, or they want to speed some approval or some reforms, they always use this let's say reason. So now you have the chance to fact check this, because you will meet those people, you'll be in direct contact with them in Brussels. And also, I think it will be an important asset for organized civil society in the Western Balkans, because there are very few members of the European Parliament, at least from the previous mandate, that they had, a list of contacts to call and to ask for advice and to consult before writing their report. So I think ECMs, it's another opportunity for both sides, for you, the organized civil society, but also for politicians in Brussels to do things more participatory and in a more democratic way. My last comment is about the commissioner. We have a lot of bets and discussions in Brussels who will get the commissioner, and you're right, it will be great if it will be from a important country, a supporter of enlargement from the member state. Unfortunately, there are just two countries that they are asking. Actually, three that are asking for this portfolio. Hungary, that is very is willing and actually is fighting for this specific portfolio. Then there is on the list of requests of Austria enlargement, like a potential portfolio, and Romania. And also, I hope in the European Parliament, there will be more interest for high-profile MEPs to take on board the job as rapporteur, because in the last Mondays, there was a job of neighboring countries and new member states, and not necessarily very high-positioned people in their groups and in the European Parliament.
Thank you, Jonut, for your online presence, and thank you, Ivan, Biljana, and Dedo for being with us here today and engaging in this fruitful discussion. So now, for all of you who are present here, I'd like to propose to continue this discussion outside, where a well-deserved coffee is waiting for us in the hall. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
И паралелно со овие за водење на правото, годишната конференција говориме за планот за работа за републиките агенти, кои што ќе постават насоката во која сите држави од Западниот Балкан ќе се движат по републиките продукти за да ги искористат условените средства од планот за работа што ги става Европската комисија, односно Унијата на натоварање на нашите региони. Целта ни беше да отвориме дискусија заедно со колегите од регионот, со колегите од ЕУ, за како се искуствата во внесењето на овие механизми од прилагодењето на правото, председно попут на Хрватска, на кој имamo најблиските примери, меѓутоа и да постигнеме, односно да стакуваме учество на останатите држави членки, држави кандидати, како што е Босна, која во моментот не е вклучена во овие инструменти. Данас останатите држави беше специјално значај, веќе држава која што глупава нема ништо да се преговорите, заедно со Украина и Молдавија, која што беше дадена директа во државата ова проект.
Well, the rule of law mechanism is important for the member state because it's the first of its kind and the first effort of the European Commission actually to hear what's going on with the rule of law standards in the member states. Something that we all thought that the candidate countries, once they become member states, achieved, and there will be no derogation. But all of us saw that in the cases of Hungary and in Poland, how the rule of law can backslide, how it can derogate. Other member states were not accepted from that. And for Croatia, having a commission, again, looking what is happening with the judiciary, what is happening with the media, freedom, anti-corruption, civil society, and the checks and balances, these was and it still is an important avenue for civil society in Croatia to advocate for the advancement of the human rights standards predominantly.
Значи, механизмот за владење на правото е важен за земјите членки, кој е прв од овој вид и прв со кој што се разгледуваат стандардите за владење на правото во земјите членки, бидејќи до сега се смиташе дека земјите кандидати тоа треба да го остварат пред пристапувањето, меѓутоа се покажа дека во одредени земји по станувањето на земја членка во Европската Унија се уназгадува, односно овие праќања, како што беше примерот со Полска, со Унгарија, но и некои од другите земји членки не беа исклучок од ова. Така во однос на Хрватска, тука се праќања подписани со медиумите, судството, граѓанското општество, спегите и кочниците, така што беше многу важно што организациите на граѓанското општество се залагаат за напредување на стандардите.
It's important that the Commission gives the recommendations to its member states. Croatia, in the last iteration of the report, got five recommendations. We were not, and we are still not so happy how much the implementation of these recommendations looks like. But we really hope that with the new report that we are waiting to be published any day now, in the upcoming periods, we will have much more opportunities to have a meaningful dialogue between the government, civil society, academia on one side, and also European institutions, predominantly Commission, and also Fundamental Rights Agency, being there as a facilitator of this dialogue. We are of the opinion that it is important to have these dialogues if we want to see the things like slowness of the judiciary, slaps against the media and journalists in Croatia being resolved in the future. And the final point that I want to make is that it is very important that the Commission decided to include candidate countries from the Western Balkans in the review of the rule of law. This sends the important signal that this region should become part of the EU as soon as possible, but also consider the signal that all the reforms are important to be implemented. But because of the country of the EU, but because of the
Ono što je važno je da Komisija сега дава препоръки, па така Хрватска доби 5 препоръки. Ние не сме сретни со спроведувањето на препоръките, меѓутоа се надеваме дека новиот извештај ќе даде повеќе можности за отварање на еден важен диалог со значење меѓу владата, граѓанското општество, научната јавност од една страна и Комисијата и Агенцијата за теmeljna prava од друга страна. Ние сметаме дека е важно да постои овој диалог, особено во контекст на скоростта на судството, односно на слеп тужбите, со цел ова да биде решено. И конечно сакам да кажам дека е многу важно дека се даде можност за овие кандидати да бидат вклучени во овој извештај, во овој преглед на годност на владењето на правото, бидејќи тоа е јасна порака, силна порака за регионот, дека треба да биде дел од Европската унија, дека прибаѓа таму, но исто така дека и реформите што треба да ги спроведат се многу важни, тоа не се важни само заради пристапување кон Европската унија, се важни и за самите граѓани.
Even also human rights.
So I would like to say a few words about the purpose of participation and also decide on the implementation of the reform agenda. So the constituted main part of the safety for growth and reforms for the Western Balkans that was made with the neutral flag for the Western Balkans. First of all, I would like to mention that I think that we can start about the role of food in a way, because in several countries of the region, where you have the same not yet in consulted with civil society and national parliaments, which is actually an explicit requirement in the regulation that is set up this food safety. We know that some countries in the region have opened the consultative process, for example, Albania, but in the case of Serbia and North Macedonia, we haven't seen a consultative process as of yet. And I think that this kind really set the whole process in the wrong foot, because if the EU and the countries of the Western Balkans are not respecting the letter of the law and the way the rule of this process from the very beginning, of the process, because this is statutory obligation to diplomatic participation. I think that this is creating, let's say, a wrong starting point for ensuring proper participation and monitoring of the implementation of this reform agendas.
Najprej sакам да кажам, Najprvo сакам да кажам да се осврнам на чистото на граѓанското општество во рамките на агендата на реформите, конкретно за инструментот за раст и реформи, што е дел од планот за раст. Всушност сметам дека работите ги почнуваат на една погрешен начин, односно без консултациите, тоа експлицитно се бара, за разлика од Албанија, го почна овој тоа не е случај со сега на Македонија и Србија, тоа е необходен и предвиден инструмент, така што беше се
дадена погрешна порека од страна на ЕУ и оценките кандидати, со тоа што не се почитуваше законот, не се почитуваше статутот, а на тој начин не се почитуваше владењето на правото, бидејќи на овој начин всушност целата работа ја почнуваме од погрешна точка и на прашањето како имаме соодветен мониторинг. So looking forward towards the implementation of the reform agendas, there will be in each of the countries a specific national monitoring committee for these reform agendas. They will be formed by the national governments, and they will include the representative of the various institutions involved in the implementation of the reform agenda, a representative of the European Commission. There will be also an obligation to, or but I expect that should be an obligation to involve also representatives of civil society, of course, national parliaments, the important thing now to really in mind that they are established in these rules in a way, the participation of the stakeholders, but in order for them to really allow for proper monitoring and also external monitoring of the process, with the help of these external stakeholders, we will have to ensure the transparency of all the documents involved in this process. And when I say all the documents, I don't only mean the text of the reform agenda, but actually on the implementation of the reform agenda, all our documents that are produced in their implementation process. I think that also there will be some, let's say, other difficulties in ensuring the application of these very robust functionalities and the same regulation that's effectively established. Not least because the European Commission so far cannot assess the legitimity of our democracy and the function of our democratic function. They have not assessed this area in their annual reports in the same way that they are assessing, for example, renewable chapters and other chapters in the process. We don't know, based on the Commission's report, how prepared a country is in terms of its democratic institution for its membership. And considering that the monitor democracy and functioning of democracy in the country is one of the main preconditions or a main precondition for accessing the EU funds and this specific regulation, I think that it would be extremely important that the Commission puts forward a transparent and robust methodology through which it would be assessing this area, which obviously in case of some countries in the region would like much survey, would be the effectively in regressing other than progressing. Виждаме напред, односно активната за реформа, треба да се формираат комитети за мониторинг, кои што ќе се представници од владата, представници од различни институции, представници од Европската комисија и треба да има или врска за учество на представници од граѓанското општество, од парламентот и од локалните власти. При тоа треба да се има кога се бира овој комитет на мониторинг, треба да се возможи вистински мониторинг, односно целиот процес да се одлика на транспарентен начин и да се има сите документи, агендата, сите извештаи што ќе се изработат. Постојат и некои други потешкоти, односно Европската комисија не има направена оценка на квалитетот на демократијата во овие земји, на ист начин како што тоа го прави во однос на поглавието за владење на правото, така што многу е важно да се направи ваква анализа во однос на квалитетот на демократијата во нашите држави, бидејќи тоа е предуслов за да се има пристап до фондовите, до средствата, и за тоа е неопходна една логична методологија која што ќе се применува при оценувањето, бидејќи она што забележување дека во однос на демократијата некои држави во регионот, како и мојата, повеќе надградуваат од што надградуваат.
Well, I'd like to remind the it's still not part of this. This that will not be left out as in is this opportunity and John from the trade will speak about who was in the role involved. But while waiting to become part of this mechanisms, I'd like to highlight that we have to work more on the existing mechanisms, use better the country report that the Commission produces every year, and to really communicate better these recommendations of the Commission. And this is actually a message not just for us, but civil society, but also for the European Commission that has to communicate better. Speaking about communication, the best message for us will be installation of the new Commission for enlargement. I hope it would be first of integrity from the country that has a rule of law and record, preferably not from the neighboring countries. First of all, because it's very important to avoid the use of bilateral disputes in the next experiments of communication.
Una stvar da domanda sam da tu sem Hercegovina v momentu ne je del razdelovanja pravo so ta se nadeva Amerika nima da bi izostavljena in tega ponavljam uspeje da vidimo do nekaj čekamo da vidimo moram da dobime na službeni termin da što je vezano za naše divjanje se korak isto tako na ovoj momentu je isto tako je važno tako je važno da je lično isto tako vlade ocenja što ima potrebno in vsekakor, da ne region, da potrebni bilateralni sporazumi z regioni.
Also, it's important to have bigger transparency in the parliament, which will be covered with studies, and so these individuals as our allies and the partners of civil society in the European Parliament. And since we heard the information of the participants are somehow increased when you are a member state, the EU, we really have to use negotiations to create mechanisms that provide meaningful participation as even when you become a member state of the EU, and we have to collaborate further because the economic competition is good in this regard. Bosnia was unfortunately for so long out of the discussions, and then we hear that I hope that civil society will also find a way to meaningfully participate and to meaningfully much of this
Mislim da ono što je važno je pilotna argumenta in izgledajoče parlamenti, ki smo mi od građanskih общества, gledamo na vize, na način koji se boje Evropske parlament, i kako se kolega kao Hrvatska skupina od 17 tako tega vloga ste veke proti jedimo, odgovarjanje, treba boste regulirati, kakvi mehanizmi za skriga, in iz tega, da ne boste tudi štrke vezan, da je to Evropska parlament. Isto tako, mnogo je važna, da regiona, da biste nam je bilo što se glede stvarite, gdje si nekam rekla organizacijna građanska skupina treba da što je odgovorila, da veliki koncepcije, da isto tako pomaga pri domnjestva i na toj način da pomaga. Вероятно, во голема мера ќе биде сличен на она што го дефинирано на Европската комисија. Во меѓувреме имаме Европската комисија за това, така да овие истински прашања ќе бидат сега коментирани. Мирата да се има така да се направат тоа што речиство државата и тоа што дефинираат како нешто правда е да се решира прашањата во легитимната структура, интегрирањето на условия. И сега когато по-малко известна е критика корекции, за разлика от това, што буде организирано известно изследване, би да му знаете, че не става исто различно от разликата. Тешко ми е да знам, че това е благодарам. Айно, вибирайте. Айде. Имам цели киста и айде. Тим начали.
Зашо ја на слушалки не осуша.
Pa da namestimo da izgleda koju zapadu. Hello. Welcome back, everybody that participates in person and everybody online. We're a bit sorry for the delay. There was a short but extended press conference with media here in Skopje, so that took us a lot of time. We apologize for that. But gladly we're back again to continue the Forum Europaeum 2024 with the second panel. Today's the second panel is focused on the new proposal of the European Commission, already started being enacted, as several steps have been taken place, and refers to the growth plan. In the framework of this forum, we will discuss the conditionality mechanisms. As the growth plan has been presented by the Commission, stands on 4 pillars, I would say 2 main building blocks. The first one being market integration measures in the regional context through the common regional market, and the second pillar being integration towards the single market. In this building block, the conditionality mechanism seems straightforward, but we're not very clear how they will be enacted. While on the other hand, the second building block with the 2 pillars focusing on increased funding for the region and focus on socioeconomic and fundamental reforms, it's pretty much enacted through the Reform and Growth Facility, for which the regulation already is adopted, and the implementing instruments, that is the reform agendas, and of course the agreements that have to be signed, are being prepared. From what we know, the level of openness of the processes has been discussed a bit in the previous panel, but we hope to extend the discussion again today. We have distinguished speakers coming from EU member states. We have Milena from Belgrade, so we have representatives of all sides, because we thought that it's a good time to discuss the perspectives from the member states, to learn and transfer some of the knowledge that we have, and also EU institutions that have been engaged in shaping the Reform and Growth Facility. Without further ado, the first speaker to this panel will be Laima Lucia Andrikiene, coming from the European Court of Auditors. She was the member in charge for preparing the
ECA opinion on the Reform and Growth Facility. And the Court of Auditors have welcomed the new conditionality mechanism or stricter conditions for provision of funds for the region connected to the fulfillment of the reforms under the reform agenda, but nevertheless have raised several concerns. That is that the risk that the disbursement conditions may not be ambitious enough, that the indicators may not be sufficiently clear and measurable, and lastly, how to ensure sustainability of the reforms that will be implemented in the next 3 years. Even though Ms. Lucia made efforts to come here, it didn't fit into her schedule to be with us in Skopje, so join us online. And the questions that we have for you for your opening statement, it's a bit for the audience here in the region to elaborate more in depth what is the opinions, positions regarding the building conditionality mechanisms, what are the recommendations that you have for improvement in this regard, and given that several amendments took place in the Reform and Growth Facility regulation before it was adopted, do you consider that your opinion has been taken in consideration in these amendments? I would ask you to be on time with 7 minutes per speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ristovski, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you. And first, I would like to thank the organizers for this conference dedicated to a very important subject, namely the safeguarding the rule of law in use of EU funds and the entire process of the EU accession, bringing together different valuable dimensions of this instrument. During my professional experience, I have been advocating for enlargement and the rule of law during my years in the Lithuanian Parliament and for 13 years in the European Parliament, in its foreign affairs and international trade committees, also subcommittee on human rights. In 2020, I led the OSCE ODIHR election observation mission to your country, to North Macedonia. So that is why now I am pleased to continue my contribution to the successful EU enlargement in a role of the member of the European Court of Auditors, and to share with you our views regarding the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans. On the 7th of February earlier this year, the European Court of Auditors published the opinion concerning the proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on establishing the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans, requested by the Council on the 20th of December, 2023. This opinion expresses our views on the legislative proposal and contributes to the legislative procedure by making suggestions on how to clarify certain parts of the proposal, highlighting certain risks and opportunities for the practical implementation of the Reform and Growth Facility, with the purpose of improving the financial management of EU funds. Therefore, our opinion does not set recommendations, but rather suggestions to the legislators. About the opinion, the facility itself, as per the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans, while we acknowledge that the Western Balkan economies need to converge further with the European Union, we called for a closer control through several considerations for the European Commission and legislators, the European Parliament. Overall, out of the 7 suggestions expressed in our opinion in this regard, we are pleased to confirm that 5 of them were implemented and another 2 partially implemented in the adopted regulation. Before diving into our most relevant suggestions, I would like to start from the preconditions for funds of the facility. The facility includes the use of ex-ante conditionality to determine access to funding. To be eligible for funding, the Western Balkan countries must continue to uphold and respect effective democratic mechanisms, including a multi-party parliamentary system and the rule of law, and to guarantee respect for all human rights obligations, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. The Commission monitors the progress toward these fundamentals, and in its latest communication on EU enlargement noted that I quote, in a number of enlargement countries, there was some progress in the area of fundamental rights. It also pointed out that some negative trends continued, with gender-based violence remaining prevalent, while freedom of media continued to be hindered by political and economic interests, which weakens control over public authorities, opens space for foreign interference, and undermines communication about the European Union. End of quotation. In addition, the latest enlargement reports for the Western Balkan countries show that their preparedness in the area of judiciary and fundamental rights varied from some level of preparation to moderately prepared for applying the EU legislative acquis in this area. It also needs to be mentioned that for the first time, the Commission, in addition to the assessment of the rule of law situation in the member states, will include the assessment of 4 accession countries, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, and North Macedonia, in its annual Rule of Law Report 2024. So this edition, the edition of this year's report, is expected to be published very soon, I hope still in July. In our opinion, we noted that it's important that the Commission continues to monitor the fulfillment of the preconditions. We propose to clarify the penalizing provision of the proposal that, in cases that some of preconditions are not met, the Commission should withhold the release of funds. While the Article 5 of the regulation, which states the preconditions for the support, has been modified in the regulation adopted, particularly in including sources of international bodies for the monitoring process of those preconditions, the procedure for withholding funds in case of a breach has been partially clarified in the recital 55 by indicating that the Commission assessment of the conditions fulfilled will be guided by a methodology to be developed. The support under the facility will be provided to the beneficiary countries in the form of financing not linked to cost, which means it is a performance-based instrument where the funding is linked to the meeting of certain conditions related to the implementation of the agreed measures. In the opinion, we welcomed the introduction of more stringent conditions for funding by linking payments to the fulfillment of conditions to be set in the reform agendas for the countries concerned. According to the regulation, if a country does not meet the payment conditions, the Commission can redistribute part or all funds to the other beneficiary countries, which creates a stronger incentive for the Western Balkans to engage with reforms. However, since the actual meaning of satisfactory fulfillment is unclear, we suggested the Commission developing internal guidance for assessing the satisfactory fulfillment of the payment conditions defined in the reform agendas. Although the progress of the Commission's actions in this regard remains to be followed up, in the future audits, the adopted regulation mentions a methodology on partial payments for withholding in whole or in part of the disbursement of funds to be developed. Moreover, while the procedure for creating the reform agenda certainly enhances the country's ownership, we saw that the procedure as it was in the proposal leaves a lot of room of maneuver to the Western Balkan governments to design the conditions for disbursement. Besides, there are risks that the disbursement conditions are not ambitious enough and that indicators are not sufficiently clear and measurable. And I would like to give you an example of our experience with the RRF. And in the RRF part of our 2022 annual report, we noted that there were cases of weak design in the measures, and other underlying milestones or targets. Unless milestones and targets are clearly defined, their fulfillment is difficult to assess, and the initial objective might not be achieved. In addition, in our recent report on RRF performance, and I'm talking about ECA special report is published last year, we pointed to the weaknesses in relation to indicators that make it insufficient for measuring overall performance. In this respect, since the proposal did not explicitly allow the Commission to request that governments review and or modify the draft reform agendas, we suggested the Commission and legislators to amend the proposal in such a way that the Commission cannot only make observations on the draft reform agendas, but also require the Western Balkan governments to review and or modify these accordingly, including the modification of disbursement conditions. The adoption of this suggestion. Yes.
We're already over time. If you can, try to close your statement with the main points.
I am finishing. Now, importantly, in our opinion, we also welcome that the facility is meant to reinforce the audit and control systems of Western Balkan countries. In this respect, our suggestions regarding the inclusion of financial control as one of the contents of the reform agenda is detailed in the Article 13 of the regulation, it reinforces its effectiveness, particularly the explanation of the beneficiary system to effectively prevent, detect, and correct irregularities, fraud, corruption, including high-level corruption, and proposed measures to address existing deficiencies in the first years of the implementation of the agendas. However, it remains difficult to ensure that reforms will be sustainable, particularly in view of the region's weak administrative capacity. So I'm not going. Maybe I will stop here with the last sentence that. It remains unclear how the Commission intends to ensure that this risk to sustainability is mitigated. So thank you very much for your attention, and I remain at your disposal. I will stay until the end of this panel, ready for your questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Slima, for elaborating what were the changes. I think that it's an important introduction to our next speaker, as an input for what I wanted to ask Mr. Holzner, the Executive Director of Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. The Institute and yourself have worked on a lot of studies arguing and explaining why the region needs additional funding, comparing the success stories from previous enlargements and the access to the cohesion funds, the gaps in development and needs for convergence in areas with the EU averages. So the growth plan is an instrument that that provides just that, but it comes with specific objectives that go beyond socioeconomic convergence, closing the gap. We have heard Ms. Lima explaining how, arguably and understandably, rightfully so, the EU institutions want to protect their the interest and how the funds of the EU are used in the region. So my question is, do you consider that the growth plan is properly devised to support reform for growth agenda in the region? What will be your recommendations? How it should be fully operationalized to support this goal, given the other considerations on the side of the EU?
Thank you. Unfortunately, as an economist dealing since a quarter of a century within the EU enlargement issues, I have to be fairly critical of the whole package. I would assess it that it is something nice to have, but it's not a game changer. So we shouldn't expect any big thing, at least in economic terms, coming out of it. Why? Basically, the first pillar on enhanced regional cooperation is nothing new, really. That's like the waiting room game that the region is in for a very long time already. It is, again, nice, but it will not change anything dramatically. because the region itself is not a big market. It's basically, in GDP terms, half of Greece or comparable to Slovakia. So this is not gonna be very effective. The only new thing is that it is now connected to the overall enlargement process, which at least as a symbol is again nice to have, but not really decisive. The really great thing would be if the second pillar would be really effective. But I don't see really anything that will lead the region as soon as possible into the EU single market, which really is the market that the region needs to target. SEPA is the most tangible thing, so inclusion into a European payment system, but that is not really a substitute for having full access for goods and services to enter the big EU market, where really countries can specialize and sell their products to customers. Third pillar, money. 6 billion, in reality, it's just 2 billion in grants, so it's really just 2 billion in fresh funds. To put that into a perspective, over the years of the program, that's something like 0.3% of GDP for the region. So that is something that is similar or even less to some statistical errors that might be revised in 2 or 3 years with regard to the calculation of GDP. So it is not an economic sizable effect that can be expected from such low funds. Moreover, if you remember, in 2020, we had a 30 billion package. So these 6 billion are basically a 20% inflation correction to that earlier 30 billion package, you know? So in real terms, it's not even an increase in funding. So this is, I think, from an economic point of view, very disappointing. So we have the fourth pillar, which would be like the stick. So the carrot didn't grow. It's the same carrot in real terms as before, but the stick got a little bit larger. Now, in itself, it's obviously great if the countries move further into rule of law issues and improve their situation in institutional terms. But from a, you know, political economy view, if you just increase the stick and do not increase the carrot, the likelihood of a great success of such a program is again very limited. So I have, unfortunately, to be fairly pessimistic on an overall assessment of the program, and also in general, at least from an economic point of view, the causality from better institutions to growth and the other way around, it's a two-way system. It's not like, you know, the Western Balkans become institutionally Switzerland, and the next day the economy will be also the economy of Switzerland. So that is not a realistic thing. So things go both ways, and I would even say that the better the economic situation, the better the institutional situations. I think even there is probably a stronger correlation causation going from the other way. And besides, also from the experiences of the first big Eastern enlargement, we know that the countries actually started to really cooperate economically in the region much more after the EU accession, when they had access to the full transfers of the European Union, when the market in the region grew, and it was not just a very tiny market, but became a bigger market, and then cross-border trade increased. And maybe on a final note, to compare again, maybe to Croatia, which is our best comparator in this case, as we already saw in the first panel. Croatia received from only the next generation EU package, which was meant to improve the situation after the pandemic. So I'm not even speaking about the standard transfers to Croatia from the European Union. If we calculate this in per capita terms, it's 12 times of the program that we see now for the Western Balkans. So unfortunately, this makes me think of that some major EU member countries, and we shouldn't forget, this is mostly about the important EU member countries. The EU Commission, I'm sure they would like to disperse more to the Western Balkans, but important member countries apparently don't have a big interest to support the Western Balkans on the way to accession. And I think this is really a core problem that needs to be addressed, ideally by all Western Balkan countries together with one voice, demanding certain things. If this is not possible for a number of political reasons, maybe a coalition of those that are, for instance, already NATO members, that have maybe higher prospects, better prospects to join the Union, should maybe go forward in a coordinated way. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you very much for being on time and for being very frank on your opinion on what the potentials of the growth plan. I think that the capacity to make a change with the plan, I think, will stay as a topic over today's discussion. Next, we'll go again online because we have Eulalia Rubio. She is a fellow from the Jacques Delors Institute. Last year, I believe, together with colleagues from the Jacques Delors Institute and CEPS Brussels, she worked on a report on the conditionality regulation in the context of other tools protecting the EU budget from breaches of rule of law. And this report looks into the mechanisms that the EU has at its disposal to protect the rule of law for the funds used for its member states. So the questions that we have for her, given this work and other work in regards to EU budget policy, is what we can learn from the EU. So does the conditionality mechanism or other tools and instruments have the power to put pressure or to guide and stimulate member states to conduct reforms that are in the interest of the Union and the citizens, given that something similar is being enacted through the growth plan for the candidates? And what are the key takeaways that should be taken into consideration when the Commission, also in our countries, are implementing the reform and growth facility? 7 minutes now, let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you to all of you. It's a pity I cannot be with you at Skopje today. So let me say something. I mean, maybe starting by saying that I am not an expert on North Macedonia or not an expert on enlargement. I work on the EU budget. And as you say, I have worked on this rule of law conditionality mechanism and also on the recovery and resilience facility. So I can say is what we have learned in applying this type of instruments to member states, but knowing that it's a different situation, because I mean, we were talking about carrots and sticks. In the case of, we always say in the EU that the main carrot for accession countries is the entry into the European Union. And as you know, in recent years, we have had this problem with member states that we can no longer give this carrot. So we have had to invent different carrots, different ways of incentivizing them to improve problems of rule of law, respect to rule of law principles. We had the classic mechanism to maintain this respect, that are the infringement procedures and the Article 7 of the treaty, but we realized that it was not useful anymore. And that's why the Commission proposed this new rule of law conditionality mechanism instrument that we have now in place. Now, what is the analysis, the assessment we can do right now so far about this mechanism and the other things we have in place? Well, we create this rule of law conditionality mechanism, and it was an improvement with respect to what we had before. It is a mechanism that it allows the Commission to act in a more preventive way when there are breaches of rule of law principles that affect the EU budget. But because I mean, I say preventive because what we had before, and we still have some mechanisms that allow the Commission to correct and to recover funds when the funds are misused, by member states, but they have always to detect the irregularity. So the Commission has to give proof that these funds have been badly used. And the advantage, the big advantage of the rule of conditionality mechanism is that you do not need to prove that the funds have been badly used. You have to prove that there has been a breach in rule of law principle, which can have potentially a negative impact on the use of EU funds. But still, it is limited because you cannot attack all type of rule of law breaches with this instrument. It is an instrument that is based on a legal basis of the treaty, that is the legal basis that allows the Union to regulate things related with the EU budget. And therefore, you can only use it to react in case of breaches of rule of law principles that really affect what we call the EU financial interest. You cannot use it for problems of multi-party system or problems of media freedom or other types of problems. You always have to prove this link. And this link has to be direct link. I mean, it's written like this in the regulation. And that restricts a lot the capacity we have to use this mechanism. On top of that, I mean, it is a mechanism that is activated by the Commission, but in the end, it's the Council that decides. It has a very long process with Hungary that lasts for almost 1 year, with a lot of exchanges, bilateral exchanges, with a lot of possibilities for the member state to put into place remedial actions before. And therefore, in the end, I mean, in this study that we did for the Parliament, in particular, for instance, we say that it has quite a lot of potential, even if the scope is limited to this type of rule of law infringements. But in the end, it has become a kind of nuclear bomb option at the hands of the Council. And you have seen that they have only used it once for Hungary. And there is this, I mean, political interpretation that this type of instrument is really for very, very, grave situations, systemic, violations of rule of law. So it's not so useful. Then the other one that we have in place, that it has also been a novelty in these latest years, and that has been mentioned already for the other panelists, is this recovery and resilience facility. The advantage of the recovery and resilience facility is that we can tackle much more type of problems of rule of law, not only the ones that are linked to the use of EU funds. You can condition, I mean, the recovery and resilience facility allows the Commission to condition the release of funds to the adoption and implementation of certain reforms. And these reforms can be, they have to be reforms that are in the European semester, in the country-specific recommendations, but they can be more than just, the ones that are very much linked to the use of EU funds. But what is the assessment of the use of this RRF system to tackle rule of law reforms? I mean, we still have to see what will happen in the years ahead. But if we look what has happened so far, we can say that it is a mixed picture, actually. If you talk with people from the Commission, they will say we are quite happy on how we have forced, let's say, I mean, they will not use the word force, but how we have encouraged or stimulated member states to put into place some rule of law reforms. But if you look, for instance, the case of Poland, I mean, I would not say that it was a success. I mean, Poland's situation with the judiciary has changed because of a change of government, not because of RRF. There were some milestones on that in the RRF plan, and the Polish government, the previous Polish government, did not do what had to be done to receive the funds. And we did a study on that, and we did an assessment on that some months ago, before the change of government in Poland, to understand what happened. And part of the reason were, I mean, there were two main reasons. The first is that the way it is designed, the RRF funds, I mean, you can delay a lot the release of funds. I mean, Poland was receiving much more funding through cohesion, so they did not need this fund. It was not essential for them to have. And second problem was that the government, I mean, from the point of view of the government, the public opinion, the Polish public opinion, was not really aware of the fact that RRF funds were conditioned to rule of law reforms. RRF was portrayed, and it is portrayed normally as a plan for economic recovery. We have put many things in the RRF, apart from other things, rule of law reforms, but this is not visualized. It's not, the main part of the RRF. And therefore, there was no harm, or there was no loss in terms of public opinion for the Polish government. I mean, we will never know how many years they could have been maintaining this position, but that says us something. And I will end with this. Then we can come up later on with more specific lessons from the RF to the growth facility. But what means this is that a simple logic, I mean, if the underlying logic we have in mind is a logic of carrots and sticks, giving, financial incentives to governments to put into place difficult reforms, well, you need to have a lot of money to really change, the position of a member state when you are talking about reforms that are, in which they have a very strong position against putting into place. So we need to think about other ways of doing it. Of course, money helps. It is a good incentive, but you should complement this with more visibility, with more political signals, with more capacity to influence the national debate. For instance, if you talk with people, I mean, I was talking with a researcher from Romania some days ago, and she was saying to me, the cooperation and verification mechanism, people say it was useless because there were no money attached, but in the end, in Romania, it worked quite well. Not in Bulgaria, but in Romania, it worked quite well. And when you talk with them why it worked, it was because it was a kind of prestige. It was a kind of, and for civil society in Romania, they use it also to say to the government, hey, you are not fulfilling the conditions of the cooperation of verification mechanism. So maybe this is something that has to be, we have to think more about. For instance, in the case of RF, and I will end up with this specific recommendation, maybe to visualize much more, the rule of law reforms as a kind of package, not putting, milestones to accomplish rule of law reforms in the middle of many other milestones to receive one installment of grants, because this disappears. I mean, people do not know why your government is not receiving money at a certain point of time. But visualizing somehow, kind of, the investments and reforms that are coupled to put into place, the justice reform, for instance, being very much coupled with some amounts of funds, so that you really see, and it is easy also for civil society to follow whether or not they have fulfilled this milestone, and therefore to explain to the public opinion that they have not received these funds because they have not fulfilled this specific milestone. And I end here, then we can come back to other questions.
Right, right on time. Thank you very much. I think that Eulalia has shared some concerns that we also have for the growth plan. We see that some things are also questionable how are being implemented in the EU, but also towards the end refer to the role of the national debate, role of civil society in the implementation of reforms. That leads me to the questions that I have for Milena Mihajlovic. She's program director at the European Policy Center from Belgrade, from everybody. Her think tank and our think tank have been working a lot on monitoring reforms, trying to put on the agenda where there is no significant progress and pushing for reforms. But now the reform and growth facility, maybe it's not the big game changer in terms of funds, but it gives some new momentum for us to use it as an instrument to bring back the debate. And the regulation itself promotes transparency, promotes the principle of inclusive partnership, requires the governments to include the parliaments, non-state actors, in the preparation, in the monitoring, in the implementation of the reform. But still, it was mentioned, we haven't been in the first part in really shaping the reform agendas involved. So it raises the questions, what are the necessary preconditions, what has to be done to allow that the parliament and relevant stakeholders, including CSOs, are shaping and implementing eligible activities. We are part of the monitoring and scrutinizing mechanisms of the implementation of the growth plan. And how, from our perspective, what civil society can do to play an important role in this process.
We can do what we always do. We can complain, we can write letters, we can exert pressure and try to at least get some, I would say, minimal influence on the, as you said, shaping of the reform agendas. I don't think that we can really expect to have any role in shaping them. They have already been shaped in close work between the Commission and our national governments. Now, why it was perfectly fine for the Montenegrin government to already in November last year publish the very first version of their reform agenda online for everybody to see. And for example, the Serbian government has not yet shared it with the public. I don't know, to be honest. Probably it's related to the specifics of the negotiations and what the specific governments want to achieve. My assumption is that the Serbian government is, as always, trying to be very tough and to make sure that they're not asked to do too much, especially on the inconvenient reform areas related to the fundamentals, particularly the electoral process and some other rule of law areas. So this is my assumption why it has been kept a secret from us up to now. We still have some time. There is about a month or so, month and a half until the deadline for the submission of the reform agendas to the Commission expires. So we are really trying to push for the reform agendas to be put up for consultation. The Albanian government, for example, almost a month ago, published their reform agenda on the portal for online portal for consultations, and they opened the consultative process lasting for over a month. Which in my view is the, let's say, the minimum standard that every government should observe. Now, what I mentioned before to the media and what I always like to remind everybody is that consulting the civil society in the development and the national parliaments in the development, in the design of the reform agendas is not a voluntary thing. It's the letter of the law. It's what the regulation stipulates. And also the Commission, when it makes its assessment of the reform agenda, is also obliged to note and to comment on whether to assess whether the reform agenda has been consulted with these stakeholders and how their inputs were taken on board. So if you ask me, I would say that this is the matter of respect for the rule of law, both by the governments in the region, but also by the European Commission, because if we take into consideration the wording of the regulation, it transpires that the Commission could reject and not accept a reform agenda which has not been consulted as requested. Following the last regional Taxo conference forum for civil society, we drafted an open letter to the Western Balkan governments and the EU institutions precisely on this topic, demanding that every government conducts at least some sort of a minimum, for example, 2 weeks. And now I think we are, slowly approaching this 2 weeks minimum period for consultations. Because otherwise, I think that we are really setting things off on the wrong foot, and then it will be much more difficult to expect that transparency and inclusiveness will be respected in the implementation. Now, when it comes to the implementation, again, I have to say that I don't have very high expectations. We know that according to the facility agreements, which will be signed between each of the governments and the Commission, special national monitoring committees will be established, and they are supposed to include also representatives of the civil society. So we are supposed to be involved in the implementation of these reform agendas. If I compare the process now to, for example, the process which we had for the sector budget support within IPA, when the Commission was establishing that mechanism back in 2014, there was a lot of talk, a lot of discussion, how civil society will be involved in the monitoring, how it will be a very transparent process. And then we could not even get the basic information about the indicators that were included in the sector reform contracts, which were the basis for the disbursement of the funds, because we shouldn't forget that this is not the first performance-based financial instrument that we have from the European Commission. Let's say, it's different from the sector budget support, which didn't have the ex-ante conditionalities that the colleague from European Court of Auditors spoke about, but it also had clear milestones for the disbursement of funds. Serbia, for example, got all of the funds from the sector budget support for public administration reform several years ago, 70 million euros, and everybody knows that the indicators were not met. So everybody in this process, except for the civil society, is in a way disbursement driven. So I think that, that we arrive here into difficulties, both in terms of the proper application of these conditionalities and the real motivation of both the Commission and our national governments to properly implement these conditionalities. But also, because of that first problem, we also run into the problem with the transparency and inclusiveness of these processes. So I think that we, from the civil society, need to remain vigilant. We will always be accused of, somehow working against the interests of our governments and our populations, because of course it is in our interest to receive the money. Of course, it is in our interest to help close or, reduce the socioeconomic convergence gap. As much as I understand, of course, the arguments that this is not going to be a game changer, but when you're poor, you're not supposed to say no to free money that is coming your way. You're supposed to do everything that you can to use all of the funds that are available to you. So I think that we will need to stay vigilant. We will need to write more letters. We will need to be really those painful participants in the process, but I think that we should try to at least get the maximum out of this process, even though I have to say that again, from some officials from EU member states who are involved in COELA and in other institutions, everybody is saying that we should not have very high expectations when it comes to the application of this conditionality. Again, everybody is in favor of actually spending the money, and if they can also achieve some reform results, as a side effect, that would be nice.
Milena, for sharing your views. Not very optimistic, but still on how things you see that will go in terms of the disbursement, but still the venues for our engagement are here to try to ensure that the intentions are met with this regulation. This is the first round of remarks from our speakers. We got a bit late with the agenda, but we hope to extend the time for this panel, should we have questions from the audience. If anyone would like to ask or comment on what we have heard, there was a lot of points to unpack. We have translation, yeah.
I will go on English, since my question. It's on? Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations. They were very useful, especially for me that I'm coming from the Ministry of Justice, and I was working on the developing of the reform agenda and all the documents that goes with the reform agendas. I have a question to Ms. Laima Andrikiene. Sorry if I mispronounce your surname. And it is related to the grace period. Could you elaborate if there is, according to the regulation, some grace period? What if in the upcoming years of implementation of the steps of the measures in the reform agenda, country is facing with some obstacles that cannot implement in the defined deadline the specific reform? Should we inform or alert the European Commission that we need prolonged period of time, that we need additional time? And is there a procedure without having immediately the procedures for breaching the regulation, breaching the deadline? Thank you. I hope I was clear with my question.
Laima, can you refer to the question?
Hello, hello. Thank you very much for your question. I hope you hear me. And if I understood your question correctly, so a lot depends upon your communication with the Commission. And the European Court of Auditors does not have to do anything with this. So very briefly, very brief, very straightforward answer. And if I understood you were talking about some delays in implementing reform agenda and so on and so forth. So in cases like that, communication with the Commission is crucial. Thank you.
Any other question from the audience? Online? I have prepared questions for the speakers. I would invite you to now, because we can have our conference closed almost on time. While you're referring to your closing remarks, I would ask you to refer to my questions that I have also prepared, but also try to reflect to what we have heard from other speakers in a way to close the discussion. We'll go in the same round of speakers as we have started. So, Ms. Laima, the question for you is that the regulation foresees that the Commission has to work closely, also the beneficiaries have to work closely with agents of the European Union that have a role to safeguard the use of funds, that is OLAF, the European Public Prosecutor Office, and also the European Court of Auditors. What will be your role in facilitating the implementation of the conditionality mechanism? Should there be such role? And how you can ensure that the misuse of EU funds will be facilitated more generally?
Thank you very much, dear Stefan. Briefly, firstly, in our opinion, we suggested to further clarify the role and audit rights of the European Court of Auditors to ensure a proper oversight. Secondly, as a consequence, we might examine the expenditure related to the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans. And thirdly, coming back to the adopted regulation, the role of the European Court of Auditors has been strengthened, and more precisely, the court is mentioned together with the Commission, OLAF, and where applicable, EPPO, as one of the institutions which shall be granted collection of data and audit access rights in the facility agreement concluded with each beneficiary. Moreover, and that is my last remark, the information provided by the European Court of Auditors reports is mentioned as a source for the Commission to reduce the support in the event that beneficiaries do not uphold the financial interests of the European Union. And my very last sentence, in September, I will be in Skopje. In Skopje, with an audit mission, it's not in relation with the implementation of Western Balkans facility, but it's about EU annual budget 2024, and we will be auditing transactions and implementations of the projects financed partly or fully by the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you for your short intervention. So as I understand, we can expect that you will play a role in the implementation of the reform facility. Then, Mr. Holzner, I think that the question that I have for you already has been in some way reflected, because this is the short-term solution. You have said that there is the need of greater political will, but how do you see, because the Reform and Growth Facility ends in 2027, and there is no plan what the EU will do afterwards with the increasing funds, also how the gradual integration to a single market will look like. What do you think that are the necessary steps, not only political, but also practical, in terms of negotiating the next multi-annual financial framework and the funding for the candidate countries?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I feel this is really very much a political issue. The whole EU enlargement process from the very beginning was always a highly political thing. Obviously, the Commission is there to put everything into a technical, bureaucratic framework, but that is just the precondition for the accession. The decision must be a political one. And unfortunately, it must be particularly made in Berlin and Paris. And so I think the only thing that the region can do is to show support for the enlargement process and to basically visit regularly major capital cities and kind of bring them a sense of urgency of the whole thing. And here I would like to follow up on what Milena mentioned, that it is better to have some money that one receives. I think this is true for the grants component, but I don't see that this is completely true for the loans component, because if I look at the loans that are offered by the European Investment Bank, for instance, I mean, you need to have documentation for 2-3 years. Everything has to be nitty-gritty solved, which in itself is good, but it just takes for ages, and it's nothing that the politician can show off with if you have elections in half a year. What do politicians do? Well, some of them turn to the embassy of China, for instance, and there you can get a loan, probably at the fairly similar conditions, but within a few weeks or months, and you can, before the elections, open already, I don't know, a construction site, you know, for the cameras. Which, okay, the quality of maybe the Chinese infrastructure might be much worse than the quality of European infrastructure, but we can't neglect the political process, and there is a political economy for all of this. So maybe another issue that was mentioned in discussion before, the case of Romania, I think it's a very interesting case. How did Romania and Bulgaria enter the European Union? It was not because the major EU member states thought that these are great countries to have in the Union, but basically because they wanted to close the eastern flank of NATO in a way, also in an economic and political sense. And it was a purely political decision to bring them in. And up until recently, if you were speaking to German officials, they all considered the Romanian accession as a complete failure in a way, in terms of EU integration. It's only now that they see that actually probably Romania is one of the biggest success stories of the whole EU integration process. But how did Romania joined the Union? It wasn't that huge domestic capacities and civil society were making the huge difference. I was told that basically people from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other ministries were literally helping the Romanian officials to write down the acquis into their local legal system. So there was a massive support from major EU member states to make it happen that these countries join the Union. So if there is not political will, both from the countries in the region, but even more so from major EU member states, then all of this is nice, but it will not make a big difference. So I think it must be clear that we need to target Berlin and Paris, and probably also Rome and maybe Madrid and The Hague, and in order to really make this a top priority for the major EU member states.
Good, thank you. Now we go again online. I think Milena very well explained about what are the fears on how conditionality will be applied for the growth plan, whether everybody will be more focused on disbursement rather than focusing on the reforms and conditioning the disbursement on results first. So Eulalia, you have mentioned that you have followed the Reform and Growth Facility. How much the Reform and Growth Facility or EU funds in more general have used the instruments to condition member states in practice. So is the EU consistent in the application of the conditionality mechanisms in disposals for the member states, or it's only for us in the Western Balkans that fear that the EU can see through mistakes?
Yeah, let me start by something, referring to Milena's comment, because I found it quite ironical, actually, because with the RRF plans, we had exactly the same problem of lack of involvement of civil society, regions, and stakeholders. And the response at that time from the Commission was that it was put into place in a very short time. It was a crisis mechanism. They didn't have the time to force, because it was, again, not compulsory to make, to involve the stakeholders in the design of the plan. And the response was, well, we did not have the time, but we realize now that it was not a good idea. And actually, you see it in the implementation that this has created problems, not only on ownership, but also on effectiveness, because the design sometimes of the plans was not perfect because they did not have this involvement of all people participating. So I think it's very important to remind this when you are in exchanges with the Commission. No, you have the time. It's not a crisis period. I mean, and it's very important to have the involvement of stakeholders, because otherwise, I mean, I was in a meeting in Brussels some days ago, and the Commission was saying, well, we are quite happy with the RF. We consider that it's quite successful, but this is not portrayed by the media. I mean, the stakeholders do not help us to present it, to sell it, and one of the stakeholders were saying, well, it was not our game. I mean, we did not prepare these plans. We were not involved in the preparation, and now you Commission ask us to help you to present this plan and to communicate on this plan. So I think it is not only good for you, but it's also good for the Commission. And I think it's important to make the Commission understand that having a good involvement of main stakeholders, it will be crucial later on to also present and communicate on this plan, and also to improve the quality of the plan. And then on your question, Stefan, but I mean, I think there are a lot of things to improve in the way they apply this conditionality within the member states that also can be used to draw lessons for the future and for the candidates. And there is a lack of consistency. I mean, we have different instruments, but we do not see these instruments. I mean, consistency in two different ways. First, there is not always consistency in the different instruments we have at the EU level, how they apply to a single member state. And I will put you some examples. When the Recovery and Resilience Plan for Poland was published, there was the main associations of lawyers in Europe. They published a letter complaining about the definition of these milestones, because they say they were not in line with the the European Court of Justice rulings on the disciplinary chamber for Polish judges. So what the milestone asked the Polish government to put into place was not in line with what the Court of Justice was asking about this reform. So this kind of inconsistencies are a bit, worrying. And you also find, if you look into detail, you also find inconsistencies between the rule of law report that is supposed to be the main monitoring tool and how the Commission assess the fulfillment of milestones in practice to disburse the funds. So it's very important to be consistent. And then second aspect, very, very important, is very important also to be consistent in using the different tools with respect to different member states. I mean, it is not, and I think the Court of Auditors already highlighted this, it is not justifiable, or it has not been explained why the conditionality mechanism has been used for Hungary and has not been used for Poland, for instance, or for other countries that had also rule of law problems. So there has to be some, or why you use, I mean, there is another very powerful tool at the hands of the Commission that is what we call the enabling condition, that conditions the release of cohesion funds to the respect of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The cohesion has been a very powerful use of this instrument for Hungary, and it has basically conditioned and suspend the payment of cohesion funds to Hungary to the adoption of an important judiciary reform. but it has not done the same with Poland, whereas Poland had much more problems in terms of independence of judiciary. So this kind of inconsistency gives room to to threats of politicization or to criticism of politicization. So I think they have to be very clear in how they use this to clarify the arguments and the decisions, why you apply this instrument to this member state, or why you apply, and the same, I mean, to conclude, the same when you define the milestones. I mean, you have to be, if you want to be very explicit in milestones, then you have to be also very concrete in the milestones for the other member states or the other candidates. Otherwise, you create this feeling of, not treating all member states or all candidates the same way. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eulalia. The last speaker for this panel that will address all of you is Milena. The question that I have is trying to take up some positive examples after a thorough discussion on the problems and the challenges ahead. So, what are the examples or initiatives that you believe that the civil society has done before, can be used, or some ideas on fresh ideas how to contribute for the civil society to be the watchdog in the region of the reform agenda, of the reforms in the reform agendas and the accession process movement?
Well, I mean, our main practical instrument should be the monitoring committee in our country. And I think that we all should now, from the civil society, be, as I mentioned before, quite vigilant in making sure that once the so-called national coordinators for the reform agendas are appointed, to really try to target them and to make sure that through some sort of an open process, civil society representatives are nominated into these monitoring committees. Now, we have different ways in which we can contribute to the work of these monitoring committees. I think that we already have some good examples of the work that we have already done. For example, in the past couple of years, in St. Belgrade, we have worked on proposing to the Commission a methodology for assessing the functioning of the democratic institutions area. So just for you to understand why I'm referring to this, functioning of the democratic institutions is one of the main preconditions for access to union funds according to Article 5 of the regulation. So this ex-ante conditionality. For Serbia and Kosovo, we have an additional precondition related to the implementation of the agreements in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. But for all of the countries, functioning of the democratic institutions is the main precondition. Now, there is the question, and the colleague from the ECA mentioned that the regulation specifies in one of the recitals that there will have to be a methodology for assessing the fulfillment of these preconditions. But what is worrying is that this is the only area from the Commission's annual reports which has never received those final assessments of progress and preparedness. So for all other chapters and sub-areas of the fundamentals, the Commission always, every year, assesses the level of progress on a 5-point scale and the level of preparedness, also on a 5-point scale, except for the functioning of democratic institutions. I think that, in the absence of this basic methodology for the assessment of preparedness, I don't know what we can expect from a methodology for the assessment of the fulfillment of the preconditions. And this is probably related then to the reasons why EU officials are, timidly saying, well, don't have very high expectations in terms of the application of these conditionalities. What we have done is that we have taken, we first analyzed the inconsistencies between how the Commission analyzes these elements of governance and democracy across country reports. We pointed out all the points of inconsistencies that need to be addressed because for different countries, they assess different things in many cases. And then we basically took several renowned international indicators for democracy, nations in transit, varieties of democracy, and we offered the third-party indicators that the Commission can then use to inform its own assessments and to arrive at the assessment of the level of preparedness. We didn't deal with the levels of progress there, obviously, but levels of preparedness. In line with the revised enlargement methodology, the Commission is expected to increase the use of third-party indicators in its assessments. So my expectation would be that these international indicators will basically inform the methodology that the Commission will use for assessing these preconditions. And then, provided that we can have access to all the main documents, and this is, I think, where I see the main problem, because we might be expected to participate in the monitoring committee and to somehow be involved in the process, but I am not sure that we will be provided with all the documents that have to serve as the basis for that inclusiveness. So without transparency in the process, we cannot not have proper inclusiveness. So provided that we can get access to the documents, where I think that again, we'll have to push for it, we'll have to be really boring. Then what we can do is, for example, and Stefan is involved in one of these, our main regional initiatives for a monitoring of reforms, but we can also set up our own shadow monitoring processes to try to show where there are big discrepancies between what the Commission assesses in terms of these conditionalities and what our external assessment might be. And again, my hope is not that we will stop the disbursements of the money. This is not the idea. We don't want to prevent the money from being dispersed, but we also don't want to lose this opportunity to stimulate the reforms, at least to some extent. And I guess that we cannot expect the bars to be raised too high, but if we can participate in the process in a meaningful way with adequate transparency, then we can set up our own external monitoring mechanisms and at least push for a more stringent assessment of these preconditions and make the government officials sweat a little bit in this process if they want to earn the money. I heard from some members of the Serbian government that Serbia doesn't really need this, and this is on the line with what Mr. Holzner spoke about, that this money is not a game changer. Obviously, the Serbian president can ask for money with no strings attached from other sources than the EU. But for a country like North Macedonia or for Albania, for Montenegro, that can be good news. Because according to the regulation, if one country doesn't use the money will be transferred to other countries. If the biggest country, the biggest economy in the region doesn't absorb all the funds or some significant part of its funds, and if this money is transferred to the other smaller economies of the region, then for these economies, in a period of just 3.5 years, this money can actually become more of a game changer, I guess. So I think that, stimulating this positive competition between the countries might be a good idea here, because, if one student is not delivering, then others can have more benefits from that.
Thank you, Milena. You tried to finish on the positive note, but some takeaways are noted from us. This discussion at the Forum Europeum takes place every year. The rule of law and the conditionality mechanisms in the process is a topic that is important and particularly in the given moment. And with this discussion and the panelists from the previous panel, the panelists from this panel, and everybody that participated in person and online help us build and bring forward the European agenda in our society. I want to thank the speakers that are present in person. I want to thank the speakers that are present online, with a hope that in the future we'll have the opportunity to cooperate and we'll meet again. With this, I think that I'm closing the forum and thank you once again to everybody that joined us.